Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 1 of our story. If you like this What If story and want to see part 2, let me know in the comments below. Before we start, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Also, check the description for more great content and my playlist. This story was posted by 𝐼𝐼𝐻𝐽 on Wattpad. Now let's start. Izuku Midoriya, Katsuki Bakugou, and Shoto Todoroki were in the midst of their second internship with 𝗟𝗏 after earning their provisional hero licenses the previous year. It had been a typical day of patrol when 𝗟𝗏 received an urgent alert about the unexpected appearance of the League of Villains and 𝐼𝐼𝐻𝐽. All of the top heroes, along with their interns, were called to the scene, as well as any heroes in the vicinity. However, the interns were instructed to stand back and let the professionals handle the situation, as the risk was too great for training. 𝗟𝗏 expressed his frustration at the unexpected turn of events, questioning the presence of the villains. All Might, maintaining his classic fearless demeanor, informed him that the villains were after civilians. He called out to 𝗟𝗏Head for assistance against 𝗟𝗏𝐻𝐽, but 𝗟𝗏Head explained that he could only erase one of 𝗟𝗏𝐻𝐽's quirks at a time, rendering him less effective in the face of such overwhelming odds. The pro-heroes were working tirelessly to evacuate civilians while simultaneously trying to fend off the League of Villains. From the sidelines, Deku observed the chaos, noting the struggle of the heroes against the attacking villains. He caught sight of Shigaraki among the assailants, and his expression darkened at the sight of the League of Villains. Bakugou, overhearing Deku's reaction, shared his anger at the return of their adversaries. Deku scanned the area and noticed a few of his classmates also standing back from the fray. He realized they had likely been instructed to stay away as well. Tokoyami, who was nearby and had come with Hawks, made eye contact with Deku. Seizing the opportunity, Deku dashed over to him, hoping for more information. Tokoyami greeted him and confirmed that he was aware of the situation. He explained that the League of Villains was back, and this time 𝗟𝗏𝐻𝐽 was with them. They seemed to be collecting people to create more Nomus, which puzzled Deku since the villains had previously been more discreet in their actions. The urgency of the heroes to evacuate civilians suddenly made sense to Deku, fueling his anger at the villains' intentions. As explosions and screams echoed from the battlefield, Deku's concern deepened. The air was thick with black smog, obscuring his view and heightening his anxiety. Tokoyami expressed his longing to join the fight, insisting that he couldn't stand by while chaos unfolded. Deku felt a surge of determination and agreed, realizing he could not simply watch as people were harmed without taking action. With a newfound resolve, Deku rushed back to Bakugou and Todoroki, ready to join the fray and do whatever he could to help. Dark Shadow waved to Tokoyami as he left, and he turned towards the battle. Bakugou snapped at Deku upon his return, demanding to know where he had gone. Todoroki scolded him for running off, expressing concern. Deku explained that he had been talking to Tokoyami, who had informed him of the situation. Curiosity sparked in their eyes as they looked at Deku. He smirked at Bakugou, teasing him about his worry. Bakugou, irritated, insisted that he wasn't worried and demanded to know what was happening. Deku shared the alarming news that 𝗟𝗏𝐻𝐽 was with the League of Villains, collecting people to create more Nomus. The gravity of the situation made their eyes widen in shock. Todoroki spoke in his usual monotone, acknowledging the terrible news. Bakugou, filled with rage, clenched his fists and declared that they couldn't just sit around doing nothing. Deku agreed, and Bakugou urged them to join the fight against the League of Villains, both smiling at each other in agreement. They turned to Todoroki, who blinked in surprise at their sudden focus on him. He affirmed that he wouldn't stand by while people were in danger and would join the fight as well. Deku quickly reminded them to let All Might handle 𝗟𝗏𝐻𝐽, stopping Bakugou in his tracks, knowing he would be the first to charge in. Bakugou reluctantly agreed, while Todoroki confirmed he had no intention of confronting 𝗟𝗏𝐻𝐽 either. Deku felt relieved. He knew they were strong but feared for their safety against such a powerful foe. He let his hand drop from Bakugou's shoulder. Bakugou, filled with determination, shouted that he was ready to confront the villains. The three of them charged into the fray, prepared to take on the League of Villains. They soon found themselves near 𝗟𝗏𝐻𝐽, who roared at them, demanding to know what they were doing there. He blasted a few villains away from the teens. Todoroki shouted back that they couldn't just stand by and let innocent people be hurt, revealing that 𝗏𝗏𝐬 had informed them of the situation. 𝗟𝗏 glared at them, and Bakugou sarcastically thanked him for the information, his eyes burning with rage. 𝗟𝗏 relented, warning them to stay away from the more dangerous villains, knowing they wouldn't listen if he tried to turn them away. He recognized that they needed to help. Deku noticed some of his other classmates joining the battle as well, including 𝗏𝗏𝐬. Momo spotted them from across the battlefield and skillfully maneuvered through the chaos to reach them, waving her arm and calling for them to come over. Suddenly, Deku found himself in the grip of Shigaraki, who held him tightly by the throat. Panic surged through him as he struggled to breathe. He had already pushed past his physical limits, and he feared that if Shigaraki tightened his grip even slightly more, it would be the end for him. The pro-heroes stood at a distance, hesitant to act for fear of provoking Shigaraki into harming Deku. Anger and fear filled Deku's eyes. Ojiro and Sato had also been captured, but the heroes had managed to rescue them from less dangerous villains. This time, however, they were powerless against Shigaraki's threatening presence. Deku's mind raced with thoughts of how he was supposed to help, not be the one in danger. He scanned his surroundings frantically, searching for a way to escape. He felt himself being slowly dragged backward and cautiously glanced behind him, noticing that Kurojirai had opened a warp. His gaze returned to the crowd, and he quickly spotted Bakugou, who looked more scared than Deku had ever seen him. In an attempt to reassure him, Deku mouthed that he was okay. Tears filled Bakugou's eyes, and despite not being in Shigaraki's grip, he appeared equally terrified. Deku had never witnessed that level of fear in him before. "Well, it's been a pleasure," All for One spoke from somewhere behind him, his voice dripping with malice. "But I'm afraid we'll have to cut this visit short. We do, after all, have what we came for." Deku felt a chill run down his spine, knowing that if he could see All for One's face, it would be twisted into a sinister smirk. Pure terror filled Deku's expression as he was dragged closer to the swirling, purple warp, Shigaraki's hands still gripping his neck. He struggled to break free, desperately reaching out with his hand. "Careful there, I don't want to have to harm you, we need your body," Shigaraki sneered in his ear, tightening his grip slightly. Everyone watched in horror as Deku was pulled through the portal, fighting against the hold the entire time. He stretched out his hand, hoping and praying that someone would rush forward to grab it. He saw Bakugou make an attempt to run forward, but his heart sank when he noticed All Might stopping him. Panic surged through Deku as he was slowly engulfed by the purple smog of the warp, the battlefield fading from view. Bakugou screamed in frustration, bolting forward in a desperate attempt to grasp Deku's outstretched hand before the portal closed behind him. He felt himself being jerked backward and looked up to see All Might holding onto the collar of his costume. "Let me go!" Bakugou yelled, his voice filled with urgency. "I have to get him. I can't let them take him." His voice trailed off as the villains retreated and the warp sealed shut. All Might finally set Bakugou down, his arms scratched and burned from the struggle. The heroes had only managed to capture a few of the many villains that had attacked. "It'll be okay, young Bakugou," All Might reassured him, though his own expression betrayed uncertainty. His smile faltered, replaced by a look of shock. Momo stood nearby, her hand covering her mouth in disbelief. "No," she whispered, still in shock. The villains had not taken any civilians, only Deku, and had attempted to kidnap other heroes as well. That's why they were so public. 𝗏𝗏𝐬 exclaimed. "They weren't after civilians. This is all my fault. I should have known better." He shouted, wincing as he was tended to by medical personnel. Soon, the police took control of the situation, working to sort out the chaotic aftermath. Bakugou, Todoroki, Momo, 𝗏𝗏𝐬, and their classmates who had been at the battle found themselves in the police station, alongside the pro-heroes who had fought. In an interview room, they were questioned one by one. "So you gave everyone in your class a tracker?" an officer asked Momo. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "Yes, I did. I thought it would be helpful if something like this happened. Considering Bakugou has been kidnapped before, it wasn't completely out of the realm of possibilities." She squeezed her eyes shut, holding back tears. Although she and Deku had never been close friends, it was still upsetting to see him in such a dire situation, especially knowing what a caring and sweet person he was. He didn't deserve this. I'll have to create a device that will connect to it, and that'll take some time, but as long as he activates it, the signal will lead us right to him. She opened her eyes, looking up at the officer, pushing her intrusive thoughts aside. "This is amazing, 𝐼𝐻𝐬," the officer said, placing a hand on her shoulder and offering a comforting smile. "Because of you, we'll be able to not only find Deku, but hopefully also shut down the Nomu lab." She looked down at her lap, managing a small, sad smile. "Would you please create that tracker as soon as possible?" the officer requested. "Of course," she replied, looking back up with a determined expression. Hours later, after gathering as much information as possible, the police force called in the top 20 pro heroes and devised a plan to rescue Deku. "Thanks to Ms. Yaoyorozu, we have the means to not only recover Mr. Midoriya, but hopefully also shut down Nomu production," the chief began as everyone settled into their seats. "We just need to be patient." After being dragged through the warp, Deku found himself in a cold, bright white room. He squinted, allowing his eyes to adjust to the sudden, blinding light. Pain shot through his arms, and he struggled to stand on one of his legs. "Of course they're broken," he berated himself internally. He had gained incredible control over One for All in the last 2 years, but pushing himself beyond his limits had led to this outcome. He tried to block out the pain and focus on his current situation. His eyes adjusted slowly, revealing a short, bald man across the room, sitting at a metal desk. The man appeared to have been waiting. In the center of the room was a metal chair, bolted to the ground and fitted with metal restraints. The sterile, bleach-like smell of a hospital filled the air, a scent Deku had grown familiar with during his 2 years of hero training. Shigaraki had his hand firmly around Deku's throat, preventing any chance of escape. Kurogiri approached from where he had been standing and joined the bald man after closing the warp. None of the other villains or All for One were present. Deku thought that perhaps they had been sent somewhere else, which gave him a better chance of escaping. His eyes darted around, quickly trying to devise a plan. The bald man welcomed Deku, stating he had been awaiting his arrival. This caught Deku's attention, and he turned his gaze back to the man. Shigaraki attempted to force him down into the metal chair, dragging him to the center of the room. Deku growled and squirmed away. Though he had overexerted himself, he refused to be restrained. He fought back with a kick from his one good leg, landing a blow on Shigaraki. While it lacked the force to cause real damage, he needed to find a way out. Deku heard Shigaraki let out a pained cry as he released his grip. Spinning to escape, Kurogiri suddenly jumped on top of him, grabbing both his arms and pinning them over his head. Deku, exhausted, found he had little strength left to resist. He winced as Kurogiri pinned his injured arms. Shigaraki returned after a moment, muttering under his breath. Deku struggled, twisting around and trying to throw Kurogiri off, hissing through his teeth in pain. He winced again as he kicked his legs and arms, realizing they were definitely injured. The bald man expressed disappointment, hoping Deku would cooperate. Deku contorted to get a better view of him while still trying to escape Kurogiri's hold. The man was shorter than Deku, plump, with a bald head and a large bushy mustache. His eyes were hidden behind round green goggles, and he wore a white coat and gloves that matched the sterile room. The man walked back to the desk and retrieved something from a drawer. It turned out to be a large syringe filled with a transparent green substance. Panic surged through Deku as the man approached with the needle, realizing it was meant for him. He twisted and flailed, trying to break free from the villain's grips, but they only tightened their hold. He clenched his teeth, holding back tears from the pain of moving his injured limbs. Exhaustion washed over him. He had spent all his energy earlier, and now he desperately needed it. He felt the sharp needle puncture the skin of his upper arm. Fear and frustration made him scream. He shouted at the top of his lungs, confused as to why they hadn't used their quirks to subdue him. Either one of them could have easily stopped him in his current state. The bald man explained that temporary paralysis would set in within 2 minutes. Shigaraki complained about needing to hold Deku still for that long, expressing frustration at not being able to use his quirk. The bald man firmly refused, stating that Shigaraki's quirk caused too much damage. Deku shouted again in frustration, insisting he could have easily taken them earlier. Suddenly, it became harder to move. The mention of temporary paralysis echoed in his mind, though he hadn't been fully paying attention. He struggled to twist around, but his muscles began to go limp. He slumped over, unable to respond as his body ceased to follow his commands. As they grabbed him and dumped him into the metal chair, fastening the restraints around his arms, wrists, legs, and ankles, he realized that it no longer mattered when the effects of the injection would wear off. He was now trapped, unable to escape. As they settled into a tense silence, the man addressed Deku, expressing a longing to speak with him. Deku shot back with a fierce glare, demanding to know what the man wanted. The man explained that he had something important to discuss, something that would affect Deku's friends later on. He revealed that he had been successful in creating mindless creatures with multiple quirks to serve as soldiers for the League of Villains. As he beckoned a creature into the room, Deku's heart raced at the sight. The creature, towering at least 8 feet tall, had grotesque features, with yellowed skin and visible scars that suggested a disturbing origin. The man continued, explaining the process of creating these beings from deceased human bodies, altering both their physical form and their brains to allow them to wield multiple quirks. Deku scowled, trying to mask his fear, realizing the depths of the man's twisted experiments. The man noted that while these creatures lacked intelligence and required commands to act, he had plans for Deku. He intended to recreate the process with him, aiming to enhance his existing quirk and implant additional ones, making him a powerful asset for the League of Villains. The thought filled Deku with dread. As the man expressed his excitement about the experiment, Deku's terror grew. He felt a wave of hopelessness wash over him, realizing the fate that awaited him. He whispered a desperate plea, wishing for an end rather than the transformation into a mindless creature. The man dismissed his plea, stating that they would never waste such a valuable specimen. He mentioned that Deku would need to be obedient and that Shigaraki would oversee his training. Just as Deku protested, he was silenced by a sharp blow to the back of his head, delivered by Shigaraki, who had found a pipe. Holding onto a flicker of hope, Deku thought of his friends, wishing they would find him before it was too late. He prayed for a swift end, fearing the monstrous fate that awaited him at the hands of the League of Villains. He could feel the effects of the injection slowly wearing off. It had been about 10 minutes. Focusing intently, he managed to move his fingers, making a fist and feeling something in his hand. Suddenly, he remembered the tracker Momo had given him earlier. It was very small and stuck to the center of his palm. His eyes darted up to the 3 villains, who were not paying attention to him. He squeezed the tiny button in its center, activating it. To his dismay, it emitted a loud buzzing sound. He froze, hoping they would ignore it. The mustached man, with a vile grin, questioned what the noise was. He stuttered, unable to hide his fear. The man, whom he decided to call the doctor, ordered his companions to search him. The restraints were undone, and he was dragged out of the chair. Shigaraki opened the pouches on his hero costume and patted him down. Finally, he reached his hand and noticed the flashing tracker stuck to the glove. "Looks like he had a tracker," the villain said, holding it up. The doctor frowned. "You really have to make this difficult, don't you?" he said angrily. "We'll have to move to the other lab." "What about the Nomu cultures?" Kurogiri asked calmly, setting him back in the chair. "We'll have to leave them. It's quite all right. They're all low level anyhow. As of now, Midoriya is our priority experiment," the doctor replied. "Now, we must begin collecting my work. Shigaraki, take the boy after I sedate him." His eyes widened as he frantically wiggled his arm, crying out in pain as he remembered it was broken. It wasn't wearing off fast enough. Kurogiri pulled another syringe out of his coat pocket and handed it to the bald man. They approached him. Unable to do anything, he started to hyperventilate, desperately begging his body to move while keeping an eye on the approaching men. Maybe he could push one for all a little further. He felt the long needle go into his neck and realized it was too late. He squeezed his eyes shut in pain. The man retracted the needle slowly. He was taking quick, shallow breaths, and his thoughts became foggy. His eyelids felt heavy. He wasn't tired, but they closed anyway. Slowly, everything went black. The police force, pro-heroes, and most of Class 1A had been watching Momo's newly created tracker for over an hour. Nothing. They stared at the black screen. The only indicator it was working was the small flashing button on the back of the device. He must not have activated it, she said sadly, looking down at her lap. Just give it a little longer, 𝐼𝐻𝐬 encouraged, trying to sound hopeful. A few minutes passed. A few more. They were beginning to lose hope that the plan would work when suddenly, a bright red dot appeared on the once blank screen. A map of the surrounding area slowly took shape. Yes. We have a location. The chief of police exclaimed, jumping up from his chair and knocking it over. Thank goodness, good job, 𝐼𝐻𝐬 sighed. We can't send forces out right away. But now that we know where he is, we need to investigate further. What? Bakugou yelled, standing up abruptly. It's too risky to go right now. It'll be safer for both us and Midoriya if we don't rush into things. Safer, he yelled, infuriated. He's with villains who are probably doing who knows what to him. And you think waiting is safer for him? Bakugou was absolutely outraged. He wanted those terrible people to get exactly what they deserved as soon as possible. If they waited, Deku might be in serious danger by the time they arrived. The police are right, 𝐼𝐻𝐬 reassured him. It's too dangerous right now. Frustrated, he thought about how foolish they were and pounded his fist on the table. It was so cold. Deku opened his eyes to find himself in a dark room. He sat up and tried to move but quickly discovered he was chained. His wrists and ankles were bound by thick shackles, preventing any chance of escape. He attempted to move his wrists but found he couldn't. He knocked his arms against the cold concrete and realized both arms were encased in casts. Looking down, he saw his leg was in a cast as well. At least they didn't hurt as much anymore. He tried using his quirk but discovered he couldn't do that either. They must have somehow neutralized it, but how? Maybe the cuffs on the shackles. He found himself trapped with the League, surrounded by villains. He sank further toward the floor, aware that his family, friends, and even the pro-heroes would never stop searching for him. At least, he hoped they wouldn't. The tracker signal he had sent would be of no use. He recalled hearing something about another lab. That must be where he was, he thought miserably, scanning his new surroundings. His heart raced as he heard the door creak open, light spilling in from what appeared to be a hallway. Fear gripped him, but he knew he shouldn't show it. The room brightened as the door swung wide open. It took a moment for his eyes to adjust, but when they did, he recognized the man standing before him as Tamura Shigaraki. Rusty bars he hadn't noticed before separated them, dividing the room in two. Shigaraki's sinister smile sent chills down Deku's spine as he spoke about having a little pet of his own. He couldn't wait to beat him into obedience. Deku felt a surge of defiance and spat back, insisting he was not Shigaraki's pet. The new stutter in his voice annoyed him, but Shigaraki's unsettling grin remained unchanged. Shigaraki laughed, declaring he had his work cut out for him. He intended to break Deku into 𝐒𝐵H𝐻𝐸, referring to him as his little toy and the doctor's experiment. He paused, his voice low and raspy, demanding to know who Deku obeyed. Deku firmly stated he would never obey him, but was abruptly interrupted by a shock coursing through his body. He fell to his hands and knees, convulsing in pain until the electricity finally ceased. Shigaraki's laughter echoed in the room. He would refer to Shigaraki as 𝐒𝐻𝐸, the villain insisted, but Deku managed to get back up, summoning the little strength he had left to refuse. Shigaraki pressed a button, and once again, Deku was overwhelmed by electricity. After several minutes, he finally lost consciousness, free from the pain. Time lost meaning as he sat in the darkness, feeling as though forever had passed. He thought he had only been kidnapped a day or so before. The room was empty, and he could barely move, leaving him to sit in pitch blackness. He examined his situation from every angle, searching for a way to escape. But being chained and unable to use his quirk or 3 of his limbs made it nearly impossible. He even attempted to unscrew the drain in the center of the room, only to find that all the pieces had been welded together. He wanted to avoid any confrontation with Shigaraki, knowing it would only lead to more pain. To say he was terrified would be an understatement. After hours of sitting in the dark, he began counting seconds, tapping his cast against the concrete to keep himself occupied. He tried to stand again, the heavy chains throwing off his balance. Eventually, he succeeded, feeling a sense of pride in this small achievement. Following the chain, he discovered it was tightly bolted to the wall, leaving him with no way to break free without using one for all. He had already tried to remove the wrist and ankle cuffs, but no matter how much he struggled, they wouldn't budge. Determined, he spent another hour poking and prodding at the chains, gaining only raw fingers for his efforts. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed as the door swung open and hit the wall. Shigaraki's voice rasped, mocking him for trying to escape. Deku remained silent, glaring at him in defiance. Shigaraki laughed, calling him a pet, but Deku turned away in disgust. The villain taunted him, insisting that acting tough would only make it more enjoyable to break him. Deku let out a low growl but chose not to respond. That was a mistake. Shigaraki demanded he look at him when he spoke, and with a surge of electricity, Deku fell to the ground, writhing in pain. The torment lasted only 30 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. After it stopped, Deku took a moment before he attempted to sit up again. Shigaraki smirked, asking if Deku had learned his lesson yet. Deku, feeling defiant, muttered a harsh response. Shigaraki, unfazed, reminded him of his place. Suddenly, a surge of electricity coursed through Deku, causing him to scream in pain. It was far more intense than before. Lying on the dirty floor, he shook and gasped for air, feeling warmth trickling down the sides of his face. Shigaraki, with a cruel smile, asked if Deku would repeat his earlier words. Deku whispered a quiet no, not wanting to endure another shock. Satisfied, Shigaraki left, closing the door behind him. Alone in the cold, dark room, Deku felt lost. He didn't want to obey Shigaraki, but the pain of disobedience was overwhelming. Tears began to fall as he prayed to wake up back in the warm dorm, surrounded by his friends, attending classes, laughing with Uraraka and Ida, chatting with Todoroki and Kirishima, joking with Kaminari, and even hanging out with Kaken. He curled into a tight ball on the cold concrete floor, hugging his knees to his chest, trying to fall asleep as his tears formed a small pool beneath him. It had been a week since Deku was kidnapped, and Class 1A struggled to get proper sleep. Bakugou was particularly distraught, blaming himself for Deku's abduction, which confused his classmates since they believed he didn't care for Deku. The glowing dot that had revealed Deku's location vanished shortly after appearing on the screen, indicating that the tracker had been discovered. Fortunately, the heroes already knew the location, but the brief duration of the signal suggested that Deku might have been moved. Multiple teams were dispatched to scout the area. They researched all known villains from the battle and interrogated those who had been arrested, but they seemed to know nothing. It appeared that the League had hired small-time thugs, promising payment for their cooperation. The location broadcasted was a large field surrounded by forest, leading to the conclusion that Deku was held in an underground bunker. Thanks to a police officer's X-ray vision quirk, they now had the building's layout. A mission was planned for the following morning. That night, Bakugou couldn't sleep, though he hadn't been sleeping well for the past month. His mind was consumed with thoughts of Deku. He wondered if Deku was okay and what the villains meant when they said they had gotten what they came for. As he lay in bed, his thoughts spiraled into worry. He tried to reassure himself that Deku would be fine, that he was strong and always managed to get through tough situations. Yet, nagging doubts crept in, suggesting that the League of Villains might be doing terrible things to him while Bakugou lay in a soft bed, feeling helpless. He berated himself for not acting sooner, for not rescuing Deku when he had the chance. Determined to push the thoughts away, he stared at the off-white ceiling, trying to think of nothing, but it proved more difficult than he cared to admit. The next morning, everyone was divided into groups of 10, forming 5 teams in total. With minimal security above ground and only a few deactivated cameras, they gathered in the field near the nearest entrance. 2 groups would remain outside to monitor for any escape attempts. Bakugou was assigned to a group with All Might, Midnight, 3 police officers, Kirishima, Kamui Woods, 𝐮𝐬𝐽𝐻, and 𝐶𝐻. He felt relieved not to be in one of the teams guarding the exits. Though they didn't know Deku's exact location, everyone received a map of the building's layout. One by one, the groups entered through the two entrances, with Bakugou's team being among the first. Inside it was pitch black. Lights were positioned every few feet on the ceiling, but they were all turned off. Bakugou had to use his quirk as a makeshift torch for the others as they ventured deeper into the darkness. This annoyed Bakugou, but he tolerated it to increase their chances of finding his friend. He examined the walls of the hallways, running his free hand over the smooth surface. The cold metal walls were lined with pipes zigzagging up and down, leading to unknown destinations. Every 100 feet or so, there was a large metal door. The first one they encountered was labeled Presentation Room. Tugging on the handle, they found it was unlocked. Upon entering, the group discovered a large, plain white room. One of the officers searched the walls and found a light SW. He flicked it on to reveal the room's features. The only distinct detail was a single metal chair in the center, equipped with restraints for legs and arms, and a desk positioned at the front of the room. However, what caught Bakugou's eye were the streaks of dried blood on the floor and the pool of it in the metal chair. Kirishima whispered to Bakugou that it was getting creepy. Bakugou hissed back, not wanting to jeopardize their chances of finding Deku because of Kirishima's chatter. The concrete floor provided a significant advantage if they encountered someone, especially with 𝐮𝐬𝐽𝐻 on their side. After finding nothing more of interest in the cold, white room, they moved on. Although they discovered numerous cameras, none appeared to be operational. In fact, there seemed to be no security at all, which felt odd. Eventually, they came across a door labeled Surveillance Room. Unlike the previous door, it was locked and required a card to open. With no one around, all might smash through the door. They stood still for a moment, expecting guards to rush in at the loud crash. When none came, the group entered through the now open doorway. Inside, they found a dark monitoring room illuminated only by the glow of computer screens, which were oddly still on. In front of a single desk was a large screen displaying various locations in the cities and even just outside UA's campus. They had cameras everywhere, which explained how the League was always one step ahead. Midnight exclaimed in distress, while 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽𝐸 stated that they had been keeping an eye on them. Bakugou looked around at everyone and noted their upset expressions as they watched civilians going about their day in multiple cities and students coming on and off campus at UA. One of the officers suggested they needed to take these cameras down. After carefully examining and noting the locations of each camera, they moved on. Bakugou noticed it was steadily getting colder, likely because they were underground, where it was always cooler than on the surface. The next room they stumbled upon was labeled Nomu Cultures. This room required not only a card but also voice recognition and a handprint. Security was increasing the deeper they went. 𝐮𝐬𝐽𝐻 suggested he could wedge it open. Using the concrete floor, he created a divot in the door large enough for them to get through, revealing another door. Inside was a small area meant for disinfecting before entering the main room. Suddenly, an alarm blared, startling Bakugou. He muttered under his breath, expecting guards to come rushing toward them any second. To his surprise, none came, which had become somewhat expected by now. They stood ready for battle, but no one approached, the alarm continuing to sound. Bakugou thought it was as if the whole place had been abandoned. He held his torch hand up while 𝐮𝐬𝐽𝐻 wedged the reinforced door open just enough for them to squeeze into the room. They took a moment to find a light. Once it was turned on, everyone looked into the room and were met with dozens of Nomus, all floating in a strange liquid with a green tint and thick consistency. Bakugou growled in disbelief. Some were more developed than others, while the underdeveloped ones still appeared vaguely human. It was disturbing to think that these were once people, their corpses stolen and transformed into mindless monsters, their bodies and minds altered to sustain multiple quirks. One of the officers remarked that they were right. This was where the League had been producing Nomu. All Might added that it could be one location of many or perhaps the only one. It didn't seem important to the League, as everything appeared abandoned, likely when they realized 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽𝐸 had a tracker. Either way, we still need these for evidence, one of the police officers in the group said, shrinking a few of the Nomu containment cylinders and placing them in her bag. Once the mission was over, she would enlarge them again using her quirk for testing. We need to destroy the rest of these. Midnight exclaimed with too much enthusiasm given the circumstances. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐥𝐬 used his branches to grab a few and crush them. This didn't break the hero's code against killing since these beings were technically already lost. All Might smashed through as many as possible, and 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐿 did the same. When they were finished, the room was a chaotic mess of green liquid, remnants of Nomu, and shattered containment cylinders. Time to move on, 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐿 said, already exiting through the previously pried open door. Bakugou felt a pang of sadness as he thought about the absence of the green-haired boy. If he were here, there would definitely be some sort of security or people around. Eventually, moving on from the unsettling Nomu room, they made their way deeper into the building. Not a word was spoken. The atmosphere was heavy with disappointment and sadness. It became clear that they wouldn't be leaving with the boy they had come for. Nonetheless, they still had to cover the entire facility. Maybe we'll find something that will lead us to where he is, Bakugou thought hopefully. Deku woke up in a cold, damp, dark room, his body aching. The repeated shocks had left his muscles sore. He groaned as he sat up, unsure of how long he had been there, but it felt like at least a month. Fear gripped him. What if they never found him? No, don't think like that. Mom would stop at nothing to find me. I just have to stay positive and try to find a way out. They can't keep me in here forever. His thoughts were abruptly interrupted when the door swung open. Get up, pet. Shigaraki commanded. Deku remained silent, knowing that any noise would provoke him. The only time he was allowed to speak was when directly questioned. We're not doing the normal routine today, Shigaraki said with a sinister grin. The doctor would like to see you. The doctor? Did he mean the short bald man with the big mustache and green goggles he had seen the day he was taken? That day felt like a lifetime ago. No. He thought, recalling what had been explained to him on the first day about the surgery and how they were going to turn him into a Nomu. He trembled in fear. Look at you shake. Shigaraki laughed. Pathetic little brat. He kicked the bars in front of Deku, causing him to flinch. Deku didn't want to see the doctor. But he had to look on the bright side. They would have to take him out of this cell to see him, giving him the perfect chance to escape. To his surprise, Shigaraki walked out of the room and sealed the door. Wait, I thought he was going to take me to see the doctor. Why did he just leave? That's when he noticed the purple gas beginning to fill the room. The next thing he knew, he was waking up on a cold table. He tried to move but realized he was strapped down. Panic surged through him. He was no longer the somewhat confident 17-year-old hero in training. He was a scared captive. He heard a door open and footsteps approaching. He was frozen in fear. Well, if it isn't the experiment I've most been wanting to work on, he heard the old man say. The doctor stood over him, but Deku didn't dare make eye contact. Oh, don't be so stiff. If you relax, it'll make this a lot less painful, he said menacingly with a creepy chuckle. Deku felt the doctor shuffle around to his right side. The doctor grabbed his forearm, and as soon as he did, Deku flinched away. But the man quickly held his arm still. He was stronger than he looked, injecting some green liquid into him. After about 30 seconds, Deku felt his body begin to relax against his will. He tried to move but could barely wiggle his fingertips. His eyes darted around the room, and he saw the doctor grab a vial of electric blue liquid and draw some into a syringe. After preparing it, the doctor tilted Deku's head to the side, exposing his neck. His breathing quickened as the needle pierced his skin. Almost immediately, it felt like his body had been set on fire. The intense pain shot through every nerve. He desperately wanted to scream, to cry out in agony, but he couldn't. The bright lights hurt his eyes, so he squeezed them shut, feeling as if he were on the brink of collapse from the unbearable pain. Finally, it ceased. He just lay there, not wanting to move for fear of more pain. Instead, he remained still, shuddering and gasping for air. The doctor explained that the substance injected was a quirk dampener, which would also help his body accept new quirks when they reached that stage of the experiment. Now, even without the cuffs, it would be easy for them to control him. The doctor announced that he was done for now and began unstrapping Deku from the table. Once the restraints were off, he realized he could move again. He thought about how he needed to make them believe he could barely move, planning to make a break for it when they least expected it. His thoughts raced. He was so close to being free. The doctor instructed him to get up, practically lifting him off the table with surprising strength. He stood up, deliberately making himself appear wobbly, as if he could topple over at any moment, even though he knew he could walk just fine. He noticed he was no longer in his hero costume but instead wore a simple white t-shirt and scrub bottoms. He walked slightly ahead of the doctor down the hall. After a couple of minutes, he spotted another hallway branching off in a different direction. He thought about running down that way, hoping for an escape. As they approached the hallway, he suddenly shoved the doctor against the wall and took off running. He could hear the doctor calling out behind him. Fear coursed through him, knowing that if they caught him, the consequences would be dire. He spotted another hallway and was about to run down it when he nearly collided with Shigaraki. Shigaraki looked shocked and tried to grab Deku, but he was quick and slipped away. Now he had two pursuers chasing him. He continued down the hallway for several minutes, rounding a corner and seeing a bright light ahead. He wondered if he was going to die, but as he kept running he realized it was a window. Relief washed over him, and he felt tears threatening to spill as a grin formed on his face as he got closer. That was when he noticed another hallway next to the window. Someone rounded the corner, and Deku crashed right into them. He quickly regained his footing and prepared for a fight. His eyes widened in recognition as he faced Hawks, who looked almost confused. Deku was pulled from his shock by an angry Shigaraki. Shigaraki spat at him, shoving him against the wall, declaring it foolish to think he could escape. In desperation, Deku called for help from Hawks, feeling scared and panicked, unsure of what was happening. Shigaraki let out a mocking laugh. He suddenly felt a sharp pain and realized Shigaraki had attacked him. He doubled over, gasping in distress. Shigaraki whispered that this was only the beginning of his punishment, twisting the knife of his actions. Deku let out a cry and slid down the wall to the floor, looking up at Hawks with pleading eyes, tears of fear and pain welling up. He quietly begged for help, but Hawks showed no emotion, not a hint of guilt or regret, as if he didn't care at all. Slowly, Deku's vision faded to black. No more pain. No more suffering. No more terrible people. Deku opened his eyes and groaned in pain. This was becoming all too familiar. He never thought he would wake up wishing he were dead, but here he was. He quickly realized he wasn't in his usual cell. Instead of being chained to the wall, he found himself in the center of the room. His feet were free, but his wrists were shackled closely to the floor. He tried to pull them off, but they wouldn't budge. A smirk appeared on Shigaraki's face from the corner of the room as he remarked that it was good Deku was awake, claiming it would make things much more enjoyable. He grabbed something next to him, a small metal table on wheels, and dragged it over effortlessly. As he approached, Deku noticed the table was covered with an assortment of frightening-looking objects, clearly intended for inflicting pain. Panic surged through him as he pulled on his chains, desperately trying to break free. He pleaded, feeling a wave of fear wash over him, and doubled over in pain, inadvertently reopening his earlier wound. He stammered, expressing his willingness to be obedient, but begged not to be harmed. The stutter that had developed since his kidnapping filled him with frustration. He pulled back as far as the shackles allowed, attempting to distance himself from the man looming over him. Hot tears threatened to spill from his eyes. Shigaraki laughed at his fearful display. This is what happens to bad pets. They get punished and trained to do better. If they can't improve, they are discarded. He kicked Deku in the side. With a sinister grin, he prepared to have some fun, selecting one of the tools from the table. It resembled a garden tool with 3 prongs, each fitted with a sharp blade. Shigaraki's smile widened as he noticed the terror in Deku's eyes. He forced Deku down onto the cold floor, and despite his struggles, Deku couldn't escape. The shackles held his arms above his head, rendering them useless and leaving his torso vulnerable. Shigaraki disintegrated Deku's shirt and pressed him harder against the floor. Deku fought against his restraints, but fear consumed him. He winced as Shigaraki dragged the tool across his chest with excessive force. Pain surged through him as he felt warmth pooling beneath him. Tears streamed down his face as he thrashed in agony. He longed to be back home with his mother or at UA with his friends. He even wished for 𝐾𝐿 to comfort him and assure him that everything would be all right. Then Shigaraki reached for a surgical scalpel, a sadistic smile spreading across his face. He gripped Deku's face, using only 4 fingers. "Open your eyes," he commanded. Deku had instinctively squeezed them shut in fear and pain. Thinking the punishment would worsen if he disobeyed, he reluctantly opened them. Regret flooded him immediately. Shigaraki plunged the scalpel toward his eye, twisting it as he did so. Deku's scream echoed through the facility, a sound of pure terror. Shigaraki laughed maniacally, withdrawing the scalpel only to move it back into the same eye. Deku clawed at Shigaraki's arms, desperate for him to stop. In retaliation, Shigaraki stomped on his wrist, and Deku screamed again as he felt a sickening crack. His wrist had still been healing from a previous injury. Finally, Shigaraki released him and returned to the table of tools. Deku clutched his injured eye, sobbing in pain, knowing he might never see from that side again. He cried, wincing as the movement intensified the agony. What he thought were tears were actually dark red blood. Overwhelmed by unbearable pain, he struggled to think until he saw Shigaraki turn back, holding a glowing orange piece of metal. His heart raced in distress. The heat radiating from the glowing metal prong filled him with dread. Then, without warning, Shigaraki plunged the heated metal into his side, holding it there as Deku screamed and fought to escape. The smell of burning flesh filled the air, accompanied by the sound of Shigaraki's laughter. Deku tried to push Shigaraki away, but the restraints kept his arms bound above his head. "Stop, please," he screamed, but Shigaraki ignored him, clearly relishing in Deku's suffering. "Be quiet," Shigaraki shouted, suddenly yanking the metal prong from Deku's side. Deku braced for another attack, but instead, Shigaraki seized his hand and knelt on his wrist to prevent him from pulling away. He turned the weapon so the handle faced Deku's palm. He could only stare in horror as the heavy object was brought down onto his fingers, painfully bending them one by one. Deku screamed and desperately tried to kick Shigaraki off of him. He attempted to use his quirk, but whatever had been injected into him was doing its job. He felt as powerless as if he were quirkless once again. Shigaraki demanded to know whose pet Deku was, and each time he asked, Deku reluctantly answered, feeling the weight of the situation. He repeated that he was Shigaraki's pet, though deep down he resisted the label. The question echoed again, and Deku stammered his response, feeling the truth of his situation settle heavily on him. Shigaraki inquired about the progress of Experiment 4, and the doctor confirmed that it was ready for the next stage, mentioning how he had finally subdued Deku into obedience. Deku could hear Shigaraki and the doctor discussing him outside the closed door of his confinement. He had lost track of time since his kidnapping, the days blending together in a haze of fear and uncertainty. He wondered what they meant by being ready and resolved to comply with whatever they wanted. He knew that being good meant avoiding punishment, and he would do anything to escape that fate. Punishments were dreadful. Deku touched his left eye, remembering the pain from the first punishment he had endured. It had been the worst, and though he had faced similar consequences a few more times, none had been as brutal as that initial experience. He felt the cold metal collar around his neck, a constant reminder of Shigaraki's threat. The villain had warned him that if he tried to escape again, he would activate a device that would end his life. That warning had silenced any thoughts of fleeing after his first attempt. 2 months earlier, Bakugou was furious as he confronted Hawks about the situation regarding Deku. The mission to the last known location of Deku had failed 3 weeks prior, and all they had found was a trace of blood that had been confirmed to belong to him. Hawks explained that he had seen Deku while undercover in one of the League's labs, but he was unable to help due to being outnumbered. He tried to maintain his composure, but the pain of witnessing Deku's predicament was evident in his eyes. Bakugou's anger flared as he demanded to know why Hawks hadn't intervened. Hawks expressed his regret, revealing how tormented he felt for not being able to save the young boy when he had the chance. Principal Nizu intervened, reminding Bakugou that now they had information on Deku's whereabouts, which could lead to his recovery and the capture of the League. As Hawks continued his account, Bakugou sensed that there were details being withheld, particularly about the moment he had seen Shigaraki harm Deku. The thought of what Deku might be enduring haunted him. They began to formulate a new rescue plan, deciding that they would need to wait a few months before acting. Hawks had gained the League's trust and needed to gather more information about Deku's situation before they could safely proceed. Present time, the doctor addressed Deku, asking if he remembered the speech he had given him on the day he had been taken into their custody. He was huddled on the concrete floor in front of the doctor in the cell, behind the wall of bars. He looked up at the bald man and racked his brain. He had been forgetting a lot lately, which resulted in punishment from Shigaraki. Deku didn't remember much from that day, but suddenly a memory surfaced. He nodded weakly and looked down at the floor in despair. The doctor expressed his satisfaction, stating that Deku would remember his purpose was not only to be beaten into obedience. It had taken longer than he had hoped, but it was time to turn Deku into a Nomu. With that, the doctor left the room, sealing it and preparing it for the gas Deku had become accustomed to. He curled up on the cold, dirty floor, allowing the tears to flow freely. Despite everything, he had held on to hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would rescue him. But in his despair, he concluded that no one ever truly cared. He sobbed, clutching his knees to his chest, not caring how pathetic he might seem. As he opened his eyes, he realized this gas was different from what he was used to. He wasn't unconscious as usual. Instead, he felt completely paralyzed, his eyes slowly closing against his will. Though he couldn't see, he could still hear and feel everything happening around him. His body relaxed involuntarily and sprawled out on the floor, leaving him helpless. Minutes passed before the gas was cleared from the room, and the doctor entered again. Deku strained to hear him using a key, then swinging open the bar door and stepping inside. He heard the doctor rummaging through his coat, followed by heavy footsteps. Deku realized the doctor was retrieving a needle when he felt it pierce his neck. He would have gasped in pain if he could have, but he was completely immobilized. He felt a large presence lift him off the concrete and lay him on a medical table. Fear gripped him as he sensed himself being wheeled out of the cell and into the hall, unsure of where he was being taken. Little did he know that the real ordeal was about to begin. The discomfort Deku experienced was overwhelming. It felt as if he were being torn apart from within. He sensed the doctor making incisions, and the sensation of something cold being inserted into his chest cavity was horrifying. He could feel everything, as if his sense of touch had intensified. Unable to move, tubes were placed down his throat, forcing him to take breaths at intervals. IVs were inserted into his arms, and metal clamps secured his wrists and ankles. Wires were attached to his head. Deku couldn't see everything he was connected to, but he knew it was more than just those. To say he was terrified would be an understatement. Tears streamed down his face despite his eyes being shut. Every few minutes, the doctor would pause and send a surge of electricity through his body. The restraints held him in place as his body reacted involuntarily. The tubes forced him to inhale an unknown gas, while the IVs pumped a mysterious fluid directly into his bloodstream. Suddenly, the sound of a drill filled the air. The doctor began working on something inside Deku's chest. If he hadn't been paralyzed already, he thought he would be from the combined terror and pain. It felt like torture. Finally, the doctor moved away from Deku's chest after hours of being open. The cold air touching his insides was the worst sensation he had ever experienced. It felt like he was finally being stitched up. Panic surged within him as he realized something had been placed inside him. His thoughts were scattered, and he struggled to think clearly. He wanted to scream, but the pain was so intense that he felt as if he were dying. Now, the doctor focused on Deku's head. The doctor acknowledged that Deku had been awake and aware of everything, and that he could feel it all. This was not a mistake. For the process to work, it was necessary for him to be aware and to endure the excruciating pain. He paused for a moment, sending a jolt of energy through Deku once more. He explained that he was about to give Deku his first few new quirks, starting with 3 today, while the next 4 would be administered after he had recovered. The constant doses of blue liquid Deku had received were all meant to prepare his body for the quirks, helping him accept them more easily. The doctor noted that Deku would be unaware during the next portion of the procedure. He recalled that his previous experiments had gone wrong when the subjects remained conscious, leading to their rapid demise. Deku felt a dull needle penetrate his recently closed chest. The sensation was agonizing as it traveled through him, puncturing his heart and releasing its contents. The pain was so intense that he was astonished he hadn't lost consciousness yet. Perhaps the injection he received before the surgery was meant to keep him awake, or maybe it was the gas from the ventilator. The doctor had insisted that keeping him alert was essential. Suddenly, a sharp pain surged through his head as he heard the ominous sound of an electric saw starting up. It began cutting into his skull, the grinding noise echoing in his ears. Deku wanted to scream, but he couldn't, and his panic escalated with each passing moment. He thought to himself that the doctor was making his way toward his brain. Then, unexpectedly, something shifted. The pain began to dull, and he found it increasingly difficult to concentrate. Sounds faded away, and eventually, everything blurred together as he slipped into a trance-like state, neither fully aware nor completely unconscious. After months of preparation, the plan to rescue Deku was finally in motion. Hawks had pinpointed the exact room where Deku was being held and mapped out the route to reach it. Having spent months pretending to be on the League's side, Hawks had earned a position in the experiment. They needed to act quickly, as the surgery portion of the experiment was scheduled for the coming weeks. Hawks explained this during one of their preparation meetings. Nizu announced that he had made all necessary arrangements and that everyone was ready to go the following day. The chief had coordinated with the police force to join the rescue mission, and Nizu had assembled a substantial group of pro-heroes to assist. All Might reminded Aizawa to inform his class about the plan. He clapped the sleep-deprived man on the back for encouragement. Hawks expressed confidence in his ability to access the security room, noting that his time undercover would likely afford him some level of trust. He added that he could probably disable all the cameras and alarms as well. Nizu's enthusiasm was palpable as he responded positively to Hawk's assurance. The villains had no idea what was about to unfold. The next day, a force comparable to or perhaps even greater than the one that had rescued 𝐼𝐸 gathered about a quarter-mile from the least guarded entrance of the lab, as indicated by Hawks. It was decided that Hawks would enter the building first and make his way to the security sector. Once there, he would shut everything down, including the security cameras, to prevent any alarms from sounding. As soon as security was no longer a concern, the rest of the team would enter and spread throughout the facility, arresting anyone they encountered and shutting down any Nomu production they found. A smaller group of 7 would head directly to the room where Deku was believed to be held. Bakugou had insisted on joining this group. The team tasked with rescuing Deku included All Might, 𝐼𝐮𝐬, Mirko, Midnight, Kirishima, Tsu, and 𝗏𝗏. Bakugou sat anxiously, waiting for the signal from Hawks. After 20 minutes, his worry began to mount. He fidgeted, his heart racing. Kirishima, sitting beside him, asked if he was all right. Bakugou, keeping his gaze down, questioned whether Deku was okay. Kirishima, ever optimistic, reassured him that Deku was a pro-hero who had been training for months and would be fine. Bakugou, frustrated, clarified that he was referring to Deku, not Hawks. Kirishima smiled reassuringly, stating that Midoriya was tough and would be all right. Suddenly, Hawk's voice came through a speaker set up in the center of the room, announcing that he had disabled the security system and that they were clear to proceed. Bakugou jumped up from where he was sitting, immediately heading over to join his assigned group. The chief of police's voice rose over the growing noise, instructing everyone to find their group and head outside. They would gather at the entrance for further instructions. Jumbled thoughts raced through Bakugou's mind, but one person remained at the forefront: Deku. He hadn't realized how much he needed his friend until he was gone. It had been over 3 months since Deku had been kidnapped, and Bakugou's mental state had deteriorated. Days would pass where he shut down, refusing to talk to anyone and hiding in his dorm room. He had cried himself to sleep nearly every night since his friend had been taken. For nearly his entire life, he had never gone longer than a couple of weeks without Deku. He blamed himself for the kidnapping, constantly thinking that he should have protected Deku and never agreed to let him fight. He rushed over to 𝐼𝐼𝐻𝐽, grabbing onto the hero's wrist. 𝐼𝐼𝐻𝐽 quickly pointed out where Midnight and 𝗟𝐼𝐻𝐽 were preparing to leave. As they approached, 𝗟𝐼𝐻𝐽 greeted them with enthusiasm, asking if they were ready to take on the League of Villains. Midnight laughed, reminding her that their main focus was to rescue Midoriya. Bakugou glared at the two women, irritated by their casual attitude towards such a serious situation. Just then, Kirishima came running toward the group with Tsu following behind. Bakugou groaned, having forgotten that Kirishima was in his group. Yet, deep down he was grateful for Kirishima's presence, as he had been a pillar of support during the past few months. Kirishima asked why Bakugou had left the group, but he paused when he heard the two women chatting excitedly about the mission. He glanced at Bakugou and then back at the heroes before walking over to them, leaving Tsu with Bakugou. Kirishima quietly urged the women to be more sensitive, explaining that Bakugou had been struggling with Deku's situation and didn't view this as just another mission. Midnight gasped, apologizing profusely, and 𝗟𝐻𝐽 followed suit, casting concerned glances at Bakugou. Kirishima returned to Bakugou, who wouldn't admit it but felt grateful for his friend's intervention. He glanced up at Kirishima as he approached and mumbled a thank you, crossing his arms over his chest. Kirishima beamed back at him, his signature smile brightening the mood. Soon enough, the entire group was assembled, and they, along with many others participating in the rescue mission, headed toward the League's hidden lab. As they arrived, the chief's voice came through Bakugou's earpiece, instructing Group 1 to head inside, as Hawks had given the all-clear. Taking a deep breath, Bakugou looked toward the lab entrance, knowing they were the first ones inside. Stealth was crucial for this mission. They needed to locate Deku quickly without causing too much commotion or drawing attention to themselves, especially if Deku was injured. As Bakugou scanned the brightly lit hallways, the stark white walls reminded him of a hospital corridor. A flickering ceiling light caught his attention, revealing a deactivated security camera. He ran his hand along the cold, smooth wall and noticed the hallway turned a corner ahead. As he approached, he spotted a boarded-up window at the end of the hallway, secured with a large chain and lock, as if done in haste. Peering through the boards, he caught a glimpse of the back alley of the building. After a few more minutes of walking, 𝐿𝐼𝐻𝐽 motioned for everyone to enter an empty room. Once the door was closed and the lights turned on, he spoke up, asking everyone to pull out their maps. He questioned whether they were sure they were going the right way, projecting an electronic copy of the building's layout. A red light on the map indicated their current location, while a green light marked where Hawks had informed them Deku was being held. 𝐿𝐼𝐻𝐽 confirmed that they had taken a wrong turn at some point. Bakugou felt frustration bubbling inside him as he struggled to keep his voice down, realizing that the pros were lost and couldn't even find the right way. Tsu shot him a glare, urging him to calm down. He crossed his arms, tuning out the heroes' discussions until they finally agreed on a direction and resumed their search for Deku. This time, they headed in the opposite direction. The lights flickered more frequently as they ventured deeper into the building. Bakugou glanced around and noticed the surroundings changing. The bright white plaster hallways had transformed into darker, more foreboding spaces. The walls had shifted to sheet metal, and the floor had changed from tile to concrete, reminiscent of where they had initially searched for Deku months prior. Suddenly, everyone froze at the sound of a distant scream. Bakugou thought it must be the other groups encountering villains. His attention snapped back as he heard the rapid thudding of feet on concrete approaching them. He turned to see a large Nomu charging toward their group. 𝗟𝐻𝐽 was the first to react, rushing forward to kick the creature, but it caught her leg and slammed her into the wall. She cried out in shock and pain but quickly regained her footing, refusing to waste any time. 𝐿𝐼𝐻𝐽 shouted for everyone to avoid fighting, focusing instead on the concrete floor beneath the Nomu. With a swift motion, he opened a hole, causing the creature to fall in, and he encased it in concrete to prevent its escape. Midnight made a light-hearted comment, teasing about the lack of a fight. 𝐒𝐮𝐻𝐽, the Protector, checked on 𝗟𝐻𝐽's injuries while assuring everyone that their priority was to find young Midoriya as quickly and safely as possible. 𝐼𝐻𝐽 turned to 𝗟𝗶Ｈ𝗸, asking her to scout ahead since they suspected Deku wouldn't be left unattended. She nodded, her tongue flicking out as she activated her camouflage, skillfully climbing along the ceiling and disappearing around the corner. The Nomu trapped below let out a screech that startled Kirishima. Midnight asked if she could at least knock it out, noting the noise would attract unwanted attention. 𝐼𝐮𝐬𝐽𝐸 agreed, and 𝐼𝐻𝐼𝐬 eagerly volunteered to take revenge for her earlier encounter with the creature. With a determined glare, she jumped up and struck the Nomu, which roared before quickly losing consciousness. All Might sighed in relief as he joined the others. Bakugou, impatient, asked how long 𝗟𝗶𝗸 had been gone. Kirishima reassured him that it had only been a few minutes. Just then, 𝗬𝗓 reappeared, climbing back down from the ceiling and reporting that there were no guards outside the door or in the hallway. She had listened at the door and heard nothing. All Might noted that they must have moved Deku for some reason. He decided they should check the room anyway before searching the rest of the floor. 𝗟𝗏 added that if Deku wasn't there, they would need to inform the other groups to continue the search. Everyone nodded in agreement and approached the room where Deku was supposed to be. The door looked like any other metal door in the long corridor, but when Bakugou tried the handle, he was surprised to find it unlocked. He pushed it open to reveal a dark room. Kirishima fumbled along the walls, searching for a light but eventually gave up and pulled out a flashlight he had brought. Bakugou raised his hand to provide some light as well, and as their eyes adjusted, they began to examine the room's interior. Bakugou's heart sank as he noticed a wall of rusty bars stretching across the room, too narrow for anyone to slip through. Behind the bars, 4 long chains with shackles dangled from a bolted point on the back wall, and a single drain sat in the center of the small space. However, it was the sight of the BLD that truly unsettled him. Dried pools were scattered across the floor, evidence of a struggle. BLD splatters marked the ground, the drain cover was coated in it, and the base of the chains was stained as well. Deku's name echoed in the dimly lit room, filled with tension and fear. The frantic search for him intensified as Bakugou shouted, desperately shining a flashlight into the shadows, but only revealing more dried BLD on the floor. Midnight gasped, her hand covering her mouth in shock at the sight. Bakugou, trying to maintain a brave front, reassured Kirishima that they didn't know whose BLD it was, hoping to ease his friend's worry. He turned off the flashlight, not wanting to dwell on the grim evidence. Midnight reported their situation into her earpiece, indicating that they were in the room where Midoriya was supposed to be but was now missing. She called for assistance in searching every room. Kirishima urged Bakugou to join him in the search, pulling him toward the door. 𝗟𝗏 halted their progress, asking Kirishima to shine the light on a specific area. He complied, illuminating the unsettling scene once more, prompting Bakugou to turn away and head for the exit, unwilling to see the BLD again. Bakugou recalled something Hawks had mentioned about surgery, suggesting they look for a surgical prep room. All Might praised his idea, though Bakugou felt a sinking feeling at the mention of a recovery room. 𝗬𝗓 pointed out some rooms labeled Operation and Recovery, leading the group in that direction. As they moved through the hall, they could hear the sounds of villains inside various rooms, but their orders were clear: no combat engagement. Distant fighting echoed from another part of the building, where other groups were apprehending villains. They arrived at the rooms labeled Operation 1, Operation 2, Exam and Prep, and Recovery. Bakugou tried the locked door of the Exam and Prep room, frustration boiling over as he pounded on it. All Might approached, offering to help. With a firm push, he forced the door open, creating a gap. Bakugou glared at All Might before stepping inside, only to find another door. Confused, he shouted in disbelief, taking in the decontamination room filled with equipment. He pushed against the next door, but it wouldn't budge. All Might chuckled, pointing out that it was a sliding door. Embarrassed, Bakugou corrected himself and slid it open with ease. Inside was a stark white room with a medical table at its center, equipped with restraints. Medical tools were scattered about, and a smaller table held a vial filled with an electric blue liquid that caught Bakugou's attention. The liquid shimmered ominously as he tilted the vial, noting its unusual thickness and the warmth radiating from it. Feeling a sense of unease, he pocketed the vial as evidence while All Might searched through cabinets and drawers, determined to find any clue that would lead them to Deku's whereabouts. He looked around and noticed an oxygen tank in the corner of the room with a mask attached to it. However, after getting closer, he realized it wasn't oxygen. It was some unknown gas. Bakugou thought angrily about the implications of the gas, vowing to take action against whoever had used it. In frustration, he kicked the canister over, causing it to clatter loudly against the floor. 𝐼𝐻𝐬, trying to maintain the stealth of their mission, hissed at him through his signature smile, urging him to keep his voice down. Bakugou shot an angry glare at the man standing across the room from him. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 had picked up a journal he found in a drawer and was flipping through its pages. His eyes scanned until he stopped on one, beginning to read. Bakugou groaned, his annoyance growing. He was eager to move on, insisting that they needed to find their target. To emphasize his frustration, he created small explosions in his palm. He picked the canister back up and set it upright before quickly turning his attention to the cabinets lining the walls of the room. As he opened one, it squeaked on its hinges, making him cringe. Inside, he found only sterilization equipment, and his anger flared up again. He turned back to 𝐼𝐻𝐬, but his irritation faded upon seeing the hero's expression. 𝐼𝐻𝐬's smile was fading and he looked rude. Bakugou's expression softened as he approached to see what had upset him. He hesitantly peered over 𝐼𝐻𝐬's shoulder as he handed over the small leather book without making eye contact. Bakugou took it and began reading from the top of the page. The text detailed the success of creating Nomus by altering deceased humans' minds and bodies, turning them into perfect soldiers. However, it noted a recurring problem. These creatures had no control over their minds, obeying their 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐷𝐷 but unable to act independently. This issue had become increasingly common, with Nomus standing idle while their 𝐒𝐮𝐷𝐷s faced heroes. The author mentioned a nearly perfect Nomu created in the past, 𝐾𝐿, and expressed a longing to recreate him using a live subject, believing this would enhance the experiment. The process began with capturing a living person with a desirable quirk. The subject would be contained and subjected to a process aimed at breaking their will, which could take 1 to 2 months, depending on cooperation. Any injuries sustained during this time would be addressed in the final stages of the experiment, and any means necessary to achieve this was deemed acceptable. A serum would be injected into the subject's neck to help their body absorb the quirks more easily. Once broken, the first surgery would commence, involving alterations to the respiratory system and heart to prepare for the strain of multiple quirks. A device would be implanted in the chest cavity to release the quirks gradually over a week. Throughout the surgery, the subject would inhale a gas designed to paralyze them temporarily while keeping them aware of the process. An injection before the operation would also help maintain their awareness. Once the chest was closed, another serum would be injected directly into the heart, inducing what the author referred to as the Nomu trance. In this state, the subject would not be unconscious but would have a limited awareness of their surroundings, able to perform basic functions necessary for survival, such as breathing and eating, though not independently. The alterations to the brain would begin after the subject entered the trance. The process would ensure their brain remained functional, preparing them for release from the trance. Additional brain modifications would make them loyal to their 𝐒𝐮𝐷𝐷𝐷 once the second surgery was complete. After this, the subject would be entirely devoted to the 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐬, capable of limited independent thought focused solely on protecting their 𝐒𝐮𝐷𝐷𝐷. The method would leave the person recognizable, unlike 𝐾𝐿, who was shrouded in thick smog. The subject's body would remain relatively unchanged, aside from a few new scars and a change in hair color. Bakugou felt his breath hitch and his heart drop as he processed the information he had just read. Panic set in as he realized the gravity of the situation. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 had not provided much detail about the League's plans for Deku, but this was far worse than anything Bakugou could have imagined. Bakugou shouted in frustration, throwing the leather journal to the ground, expressing his outrage at the situation. He was furious at the thought of what the villains were planning. 𝐼𝐻𝐬, picking up the journal from the floor, informed Bakugou that the surgery was likely scheduled for the next few weeks, which meant they still had time to intervene. Bakugou's anger and panic boiled over as he insisted they needed to find Deku immediately. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 agreed but reminded him that they should gather the others first. Bakugou, unwilling to waste time, decided to search for Deku on his own and stormed towards the door, only to bump into Kirishima. Kirishima greeted him with enthusiasm, explaining that he had been sent to find Bakugou and 𝐼𝐻𝐬 to help open a heavily reinforced door. Bakugou, irritated, urged 𝗂𝐻𝐻𝐸 to be quiet and called for All Might's assistance. Once All Might arrived, Bakugou expressed his annoyance at 𝗂𝐻𝐻𝐸 blocking the way, prompting 𝗂𝐻𝐻𝐸 to step aside. As Bakugou stepped into the hallway, he found the group gathered around another door that looked different from the others. It was larger, with triangular metal panels in each corner, and had various security features, including fingerprint and eye scanners. The label next to the door read, "Recovery," causing Bakugou's stomach to twist with worry. They had already checked the other two rooms, increasing the likelihood that Deku was inside this one. Frustrated, Bakugou mentally questioned why Deku couldn't have been in a different room. All Might approached the door, noting the damage from previous attempts to open it. He took hold of the edges and pulled, producing a loud screech as the door resisted. With another strong tug, the door finally cracked and fell to the ground. Tsu commented on the fortunate fact that Hawks had disabled the alarms, allowing them to proceed without alerting anyone. As Bakugou stepped into the room, he quickly retreated, exclaiming about the cold air that rushed out into the hallway. 𝗂𝐻𝐻𝐸 teased him, suggesting that he should keep Tsu warm, as she looked tired. Tsu then offered to keep watch outside, feeling she would be more of a burden inside. Midnight approved of Tsu's decision, giving her a smile and a thumbs up. The others began searching the small, dark room, feeling along the chilled walls for any switches or buttons that could help them. Mirko called out, claiming she had found another door, and asked Bakugou for some light. He created small explosions in his hand to illuminate the area. All Might confirmed that it was another sliding door, which opened easily to reveal a larger room. Bakugou rushed ahead, his eyes locking onto the figure in the center of the room. He called out to Deku, racing over without hesitation. However, he stopped short, his breath catching in his throat at the sight before him. Deku was suspended from the ceiling, restrained by metal clamps on his forearms, with a mask attached to his face. Tubes and wires covered his skin, and he bore numerous wounds, including a significant incision along his torso. The toll of the past few months was evident. Deku looked weak and unwell. He had lost a considerable amount of muscle over the last 3 months, and now he looked weak and sickly. His voice trailed off as he covered his mouth, feeling tears pricking at his eyes but refusing to let them fall. Bakugou rushed the remaining distance to his friend, panic rising within him. 𝗂𝐻𝐻𝐸 ran up beside Bakugou, trying to comfort him, assuring him that they had found Midoriya and that he would be okay. All Might sighed sadly as he walked forward, slowly removing the various tubes and wires attached to Midoriya. The strange serums leaked out of the open ends onto the floor, no longer having a body to enter. He unclipped the straps, loosening the mask and pulling the tube out of Midoriya's throat. His attention then turned to the metal restraints holding the boy up. Bakugou panicked, watching with horror as All Might worked to remove the equipment, urging him to be careful. All Might slid an arm under Midoriya for support and snapped the restraint, carefully rearranging him as he slumped into All Might's arms. He lifted him up, moving him from the spot where he had been restrained. Suddenly, a shrill alarm sounded, indicating that some kind of sensor had been triggered. All Might held Midoriya tighter, urgency filling the air. 𝗂𝐻𝐻𝐸 grabbed Bakugou's arm, tugging him toward the door, urging him to move. Bakugou snapped back to reality, realizing the situation. He quickly spun around, seeing the others sprinting out the door, All Might already on his way toward the exit. He couldn't lose sight of Midoriya again. He ran after All Might, calling out to him. 𝗂𝐻𝐻𝐸 yelled for Bakugou to wait, but he was already in motion. Finally, Bakugou caught up with All Might, glancing down to see Midoriya limp in his arms. He screamed at All Might to be gentle, noticing how Midoriya was being jostled around. All Might shouted back, readjusting Midoriya to try and stop the shaking. A deafening screech echoed from behind them, sending panic through Bakugou. He glanced over his shoulder, realizing the danger was closing in. 𝐼𝐶𝐼𝐿 shouted to get Midoriya out of there, raising a thick wall of concrete behind them. He warned that it wouldn't hold long but would give them a head start. Tsu directed everyone toward the exit, and they rounded a corner, recognizing the window at the end of the hall they had passed on their way in. Bakugou heard a crash behind them, knowing the threat had broken through the wall. Mirko shouted into her earpiece that they had 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐃𝐞𝐭 but were being pursued by a horde of enemies. They needed backup. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 ran into an open room, calling for everyone to follow. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐃𝐞𝐭 spun around and slammed the door shut behind them, acting a thick wall. Bakugou shouted at 𝐼𝐻𝐬, demanding to see 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐃𝐞𝐭, his voice filled with desperation. Kirishima placed a hand on Bakugou's shoulder, trying to calm him, but Bakugou insisted, cornering the hero. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 relented, carefully laying the fragile boy down. Bakugou fell to the floor next to 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐃𝐞𝐭, careful not to touch him. He felt a surge of anger and grief as he looked at his friend, wondering what had been done to him. He pleaded silently for 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐃𝐞𝐭 to hold on, feeling a mix of emotions boiling inside him. He reached out, grabbing 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐃𝐞𝐭's hand and interlacing their fingers, placing his friend's fragile hand between both of his. Gathering the courage to examine him, he blocked out the chaos around him, focusing solely on 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐃𝐞𝐭. He looked at 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐃𝐞𝐭's face and noticed the large incisions running horizontally over his forehead and around the back of his head. His face bore bruises and cuts that didn't seem to be from the surgery. His left eye appeared slightly sunken, and he had dark circles under both eyes. Bakugou's gaze traveled down to 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐃𝐞𝐭's chest. An incision ran from just above his collarbone to just above his belly button, branching off on the left side, likely for better access to his heart. Scars and deep cuts marred his skin, and he was covered in sores from where the tubes had been, blood trickling from every incision due to the movement. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐃𝐞𝐭's breathing was becoming wet and raspy, almost a rattle. Bakugou felt a surge of panic as he looked at Deku, who was connected to a ventilator. The thought of his friend suffocating was overwhelming. He clutched Deku's hand tightly, holding it securely between his own. Deku was supposed to be okay. He couldn't die. Bakugou's voice trembled as he expressed his fears, gripping Deku's hand with all his strength. Tears threatened to spill from his eyes. 𝐮𝐬𝐃𝐴 was working frantically, trying to reinforce the crumbling walls with thicker slabs of concrete. The urgency of the situation snapped Bakugou back to reality as he scanned the room for his classmates. They were huddled in the far corner, and he felt a rush of relief upon spotting them. 𝐼𝐻𝐬𝐃𝐞𝐭 shouted for Bakugou to move Deku to safety with their classmates, instructing them to stay clear of the Nomus if they broke through. Bakugou called out to Kirishima, asking him to help with Deku. He could lift him alone but didn't want to risk causing more harm. Kirishima responded quickly, assuring 𝐬𝐿 that he would return. He rushed over to assist Bakugou. They carefully lifted Deku, trying to keep him as far from the chaos as possible. Mirko's voice crackled through the earpiece, urging everyone to hurry as 𝐮𝐬𝐃𝐞𝐭 struggled to hold back the oncoming threat. Bakugou felt a surge of determination and leaped up, ready to join the fight. Kirishima urged him to stay back, adjusting his hold on Deku. Bakugou was resolute. He had to keep Deku safe this time. Suddenly, silence enveloped the room. The scratching at the door ceased. Then, chaos erupted. The Nomus screeched louder than before as the other heroes engaged in battle. The sounds of conflict filled the air, punctuated by explosions and shouts. After a tense few minutes, silence returned. Bakugou's heart raced as he wondered if they had won. Moments later, a voice came through the earpiece, announcing that all the Nomus had been restrained or eliminated. Relief washed over the group as they debated whether it was safe to lower the protective walls. 𝐮𝐬𝐃𝐞𝐭 made the decision, gradually lowering the layers of concrete. To their relief, the chief of police appeared, flanked by several heroes. He expressed his regret for the delay, his gaze falling on Deku, concern etched on his face. Bakugou, feeling a surge of frustration, urged them to get a stretcher for Deku. He held Deku's hand gently, desperate for help. Medical personnel rushed in, carefully lifting Deku onto a stretcher and placing a mask over his face to assist his breathing. 𝐼𝐻𝐬𝐃𝐞𝐭 approached Bakugou and embraced him. This time, Bakugou didn't resist. He let the tears flow, overwhelmed by the gravity of the situation. He had tried to hold it together during the rescue, but now, faced with his worst fears, he felt it was too much to bear. He believed he should have protected Deku better. Kirishima and 𝐬𝐿 joined in, wrapping their arms around him in support. The entirety of Class 1A was staring at Deku as he lay motionless in a hospital bed. 𝐼𝐻𝐬𝐃𝐞𝐭 and 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐽 were speaking with the doctors in the hallway. The doctor explained that everything had been done expertly. There were no casualties from poorly performed surgery, but they had discovered unknown substances in his BLD, a strange device in his chest, and alterations to his respiratory system. MRI scans showed minimal brain activity, with only the parts responsible for basic functions like breathing and blinking still operational. He had endured immense pressure, and his brain seemed altered to sustain multiple quirks. 𝐒𝐮𝐬, filled with worry, asked if he would live. The doctor reassured her that it was very likely he would survive, though they still needed to remove the device from his chest, which would be risky and require another surgery. He believed that Deku would pull through. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 was overwhelmed with emotion, and All Might hugged her, trying to comfort her. They would continue running tests and providing the best care possible. Back inside the room, 𝗟𝗟𝐼𝐜 was in tears, comforted by Iida. The atmosphere was heavy with shock, leaving everyone speechless. Bakugou gently held Deku's hand. Deku had a ventilator in place and bandages covered his body except for his face. His head had been carefully shaved around the existing incisions. He wore a neck brace due to a fractured vertebra, and it was revealed that his left eye, which had been slightly sunken, had suffered severe injury, leaving him blind in that eye. The doctors had said it was a miracle he still had it at all. They would have to remove the device found in his chest, but the alterations to his brain were permanent. A heart monitor beeped softly in the background, and IVs were connected to his arm. He had several fractured bones, suggesting he had endured significant trauma. His arm and leg were encased in casts. The hospital staff was doing everything they could to support him. Yaoyorozu, with a forced smile, tried to uplift everyone by sharing that the doctor had said there was a high chance he would survive due to the expert care he had received. 3 months later, the nurse was on her usual rounds. Next on her list was Izuku Midoriya. She needed to clean his wounds, change his bandages and dressings, tend to his IVs, and adjust his position to prevent bed sores. If he was going to wake up, now would be the time. The longer he remained unresponsive, the less likely it was that he would awaken, and so far, he had shown no signs of doing so. She had come to know his friends and family well by now. Every day, a vase full of fresh flowers adorned his room, sent by them. His mother visited daily, as did his classmate Bakugou. The rest of his classmates came in a couple of times a week. Though she had performed this routine countless times, today felt different as she approached his room. She entered and flicked on the light. Normally, she avoided doing this during her rounds with other patients to prevent waking them, but she felt it was acceptable in this case. It made her job easier to see. As she walked to his bed, she gasped in surprise. A smile spread across her face as she realized he was awake. However, there was no reaction from him. His eyes were open, staring blankly at the ceiling. She pressed the button near his bed to call the doctor. She asked him how he felt, sitting down in the chair next to his bed and grasping his hand. Still, there was no response. He didn't seem to hear or see her at all. He didn't react when she held his hand. Her initial happiness shifted to concern and disappointment. She understood this was a possibility if he woke up. The doctor rushed in, asking what was wrong. She informed him that Deku was awake. The doctor expressed excitement, calming down as he processed the news. She forced a smile, acknowledging the moment's significance but also the gravity of the situation. The doctor approached Deku, adjusting the bed to sit him up. There was still no reaction. He continued to stare blankly. The doctor noted that he was not brain dead, as confirmed by the MRIs. He was breathing on his own, and all bodily functions were operating without intervention. However, he could not think and was mostly unaware of his surroundings. The nurse diligently recorded these observations for his chart. "Let's call his family." The doctor turned and smiled at the nurse, who returned a weak smile. Bakugou rushed through the doors of the hospital, his classmates trailing closely behind him. He glanced at the receptionist, who nodded in acknowledgement. Bakugou's classmates called out to him, urging him to wait, but he didn't stop. He sprinted toward the stairs, opting to climb the 3 stories rather than wait for the elevator. Bursting into Deku's room, he felt a familiar sense of dread. He had been visiting every day for the past 3 months, witnessing no change in Deku's condition. While most of the bandages had disappeared and his broken bones had healed, His overall state remained unchanged. The only noticeable difference was that Deku's hair had begun to grow white, a change the doctor attributed to the stress from the incident, though Bakugou suspected there was more to it. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 was already there, holding her son's hand tightly. Bakugou's heart raced as he called out to Deku, his voice filled with hope. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 jumped at the sound of his voice, a weak chuckle escaping her lips as she recognized him. "Katsuki, you scared me," she said softly. He rushed to the side of the bed, relief flooding him when he saw Deku's eyes open. "Izuku, I'm so happy you're awake. How are you feeling? Are you okay? I've missed you so much," he exclaimed, but received no response. "Izuku," he called again, concern creeping into his voice. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 suddenly began to cry, her grip on Deku's hand tightening. "What's wrong with him?" Bakugou asked, sitting down beside her. Deku stared blankly ahead, his mouth slightly open, looking utterly exhausted. "The doctor said this would probably happen," 𝐒𝐮𝐬 sobbed. "Said what would happen? Why isn't he answering?" Bakugou's voice grew more frantic. "He's permanently stuck in a catatonic-like state," the doctor explained as he entered the room, clipboard in hand, with the rest of Class 1A following behind him. "Deku-kun." 𝐼𝐼𝐻𝐿 called out, rushing toward him, but there was no reaction. She wrapped her arms around him, only to be pulled back by Bakugou's sharp warning. "Careful," he barked. "Are you okay, Deku?" 𝐼𝐼𝐻𝐿 asked, her concern evident as she gazed into his blank eyes. The doctor was explaining, Bakugou snapped at her. "He's permanently stuck in a catatonic-like state," he reiterated. "This means he doesn't have thoughts, can't express or feel emotions or speak. He will be mute and won't react to anything, whether it's the temperature of the room or something life-threatening. He'll always be in a trance-like state due to the alterations to his brain and the stress of multiple quirks being forced upon him." 𝐒𝐮𝐬 sobbed, clutching Deku's hand as Bakugou felt his heart drop. Tears threatened to spill from his eyes, but he fought them back, determined to remain strong. This did not stop the others from expressing their emotions. "This can't be happening. No, he's supposed to be okay. This isn't supposed to happen," Bakugou thought frantically, his gaze darting back to Deku. He placed an arm around 𝐒𝐮𝐬, trying to comfort her. "We'll keep him here for another month to allow the rest of his injuries to heal. I suggest physical therapy," the doctor continued. "Physical therapy? I thought you said he can't do anything." Bakugou questioned, his voice cracking. "We're not sure yet, since he just woke up, but the journal we recovered indicated that he might be able to walk and move if someone is helping him. If someone leads him somewhere, he would follow blindly, or if someone dresses or feeds him, he would cooperate and not be limp." The doctor paused, gathering his thoughts. But after months of no movement and with his damaged body, physical therapy would be beneficial. After the doctor left, all might join them. They spent about an hour reminiscing about fond memories of Deku, which seemed to lift 𝐒𝐮𝐬's spirits as she held his hand the entire time. Hours later, everyone had left except for Bakugou. Turned to Deku, offering a pained smile as he scooted closer to him in the hospital bed. "Hey there, I really miss you," he said, but received no reply. "So does everyone else. Your mom's been here every day to visit you." Bakugou knew he shouldn't expect a reaction, but it still hurt to see Deku staring blankly ahead, lost in his own world. Bakugou gently turned Deku's face toward him, but he still received only a vacant stare. Please say something, Deku," he pleaded, cupping Deku's face in his hands, but there was no response. He pulled Deku into a hug, closing his eyes and holding on tightly. After a few minutes, he reluctantly let go, and Deku returned to his forward-facing position. Bakugou sat there for a while, resting his head on Deku's shoulder and holding his hand. Finally, he mustered the courage to look up and study Deku's appearance. A large scar crossed Deku's forehead and ran over the top of his head. His hair had grown back after being shaved 3 months ago, but instead of its usual dark green color, it now had large sections of white with pale streaks running through the remaining green. His face was emotionless, with a blank stare, and though his right eye remained vibrant green, his left eye bore a scar and had faded drastically in color. His arms and legs were marked with new, prominent scars, and if one could see his chest, they would notice a significant scar running through the center, a reminder of the trauma he had endured. At least his adorable freckles remained unchanged. Bakugou sighed sadly as he left the room, knowing that the boy he cared for was gone. He couldn't sit through school, bouncing his leg anxiously. All he wanted was to go back and visit Deku. Even though Deku couldn't talk and seemed dazed, it was comforting to see him awake. Bakugou had spent the entire night searching the internet for answers about Deku's condition, but he found nothing, which didn't surprise him. As soon as the bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, Bakugou jumped out of his seat and headed straight for the door. Kirishima called after him, wondering where he was going since they had planned a movie night. Bakugou simply replied that he was going to the hospital, not bothering to look back as he left. Kirishima acknowledged him with a sad smile, asking him to say hi to Midoriya. After stopping to buy some flowers, Bakugou entered the hospital. The receptionist greeted him warmly, and he acknowledged her before heading toward the back without asking for permission. She expressed her sympathy for his friend, and he sighed in response before making his way to the elevator. Impatiently tapping his foot, he felt frustrated at how long it took to ascend the 3 floors. When the elevator finally stopped, he rushed out into the hospital corridors. Peeking into Deku's room, Bakugou's heart sank when he didn't see him in bed. Panic set in as he wondered if the villains had returned. He called out for Deku and rushed into the room, only to find Deku in a wheelchair by the window, his fluffy white and green hair visible. Relieved, Bakugou walked over and ruffled Deku's hair, careful to avoid the healing area. He chuckled, realizing that a nurse must have moved him to enjoy the view. Satisfied that everything was okay, he noticed the wilting flowers in the vase and replaced them with the fresh sunflowers he had just bought. He admired the flowers, recalling they were Deku's favorite, though he felt a twinge of sadness knowing Deku couldn't appreciate them like he used to. Bakugou gently tucked one of the small sunflowers behind Deku's ear, imagining how adorable he would look if he could show any emotion. Normally, Deku would have blushed and covered his face. With a smile, Bakugou remembered his friend's request from earlier and suggested they go on an adventure. He figured Deku must be tired of the room, and he himself was eager for a change of scenery. He unlocked the wheels of the chair and guided it toward the door, spotting the doctor in the hallway. He asked the doctor if they could take a walk, not having considered whether it was allowed. The doctor encouraged them to get outside, reminding Bakugou not to run off with Deku. Bakugou assured him they would be back and noted that it would be great if they could help Deku stand, even if he couldn't walk. As they made their way to the cafeteria on the 2nd floor, Bakugou admitted to Deku that he was starving, having been too anxious to eat at school. The elevator ride was quiet, and a few people got off, casting concerned looks at Deku and offering sympathetic glances to Bakugou, whose tired expression and scars drew attention. He glared at them, not wanting their pity. After the crowd dispersed, Bakugou pushed the chair into the elevator, turning it to face the door before stopping to press the button for the 2nd floor. The few remaining passengers in the elevator cast nervous glances at Deku, unsettled by his emotionless, blank stare. Bakugou snapped at them, expressing his irritation with inconsiderate people. One of the onlookers stammered an apology, quickly averting their gaze, while the others followed suit, realizing they had been staring. Bakugou must have subconsciously placed his hand on Deku's head, as he found himself untangling his fingers from Deku's hair when the elevator finally came to a stop. The doors opened, and he pushed Deku off the elevator, wandering through the maze of halls with purpose. He had spent a lot of time here over the past 3 months and knew his way around well. Turning a corner, he arrived at the entrance to the cafeteria. He announced their arrival to Deku as they stepped inside, where dozens of people were seated at tables, engaged in conversation. Bakugou approached the menu, contemplating their options. He considered the tomato soup or chicken sandwich, ultimately deciding on the sandwich. Pausing, he glanced down at Deku, wondering if he could eat. The journal he had read during Deku's rescue indicated that he would be able to. Perhaps it was worth a try, but he needed to ensure it was something safe. He decided on soup for Deku, finishing his thought with a hint of hesitation. After a bit of searching, he found an empty table and settled Deku there. He instructed Deku to stay put while he fetched their food, needing both hands to carry the trays. Standing in line for a few minutes, he frequently glanced back at Deku to ensure he was all right. Bakugou noticed people staring at Deku or giving him odd looks, and it took all his restraint not to leave the line and confront them. When he finally reached the front, the lunch lady greeted him with enthusiasm. He acknowledged her politely, though he found her cheerfulness grating, especially since she had tried to befriend him ever since he started coming here with 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽 every night. He wished she would understand that he was only here for Deku. She inquired about Deku's condition, and Bakugou replied that he was physically fine, but mentally not so great. She expressed her sympathy and offered her support, but he simply grumbled in response, taking the trays of food she had prepared and making his way back to their table, his polite demeanor fading as soon as he left her sight. A genuine smile returned as soon as he saw Deku again. He dragged a chair over, spinning it around to sit backward, facing Deku while pulling the soup closer. He pondered how this would work, resting his chin on his arms crossed over the back of the chair. After a moment, he decided to proceed. He warned Deku not to choke before scooping up a spoonful of soup, blowing on it to cool it down before bringing it to his friend's mouth, careful not to spill. Deku opened his mouth instinctively, and Bakugou felt a surge of relief as Deku closed his lips around the spoon. He pulled it back, watching as Deku swallowed. Bakugou smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment. He continued feeding Deku spoonfuls of soup before taking a bite of his sandwich. The food was surprisingly good for hospital fare. He thought for a moment before tearing off a piece of bread from his sandwich and holding it up to Deku's mouth. This time, instead of just swallowing, Deku chewed. Bakugou beamed, realizing that Deku could eat solids too. Just then his phone rang, and 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽's name appeared on the screen. He answered, a bit confused by her worried tone as she asked if he had taken Izuku out of his room. He reassured her that he had asked the doctor for permission to go for a walk. Relief washed over her as she whispered her gratitude, asking where they were. He simply replied that they were in the cafeteria, and she stated she would be there soon, her panic subsiding as she made her way toward the elevator. He hung up the phone and continued eating his sandwich, offering Deku a spoonful every few bites. He noticed 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽 waving at him from across the room and returned her gesture as she approached. After giving Deku a warm hug, she pulled up a chair. I see they finally got you out of that dreaded room, she said, smiling as she looked into Deku's face. Oh, look at that, you love sunflowers, she laughed, noticing the sunflower tucked behind her son's ear. She glanced at the two trays on the table. Hungry, aren't we? She teased, raising an eyebrow playfully. Bakugou explained that one of the trays was for Deku. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽 turned her attention to Deku and asked if he could eat. Bakugou assured her that he made less of a mess than before, though he still needed help. He gestured toward the tomato soup he had been feeding him. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽 smiled at Bakugou, expressing her appreciation for his friendship. He felt a pang of sadness, knowing he hadn't always been a good friend when it truly mattered, but she was unaware of that. Mind if she began, looking at the soup. Of course, he replied, handing it over to her. As she scooped up a spoonful, she seemed nervous. I was going to run this by the school and ask you and your friends. She looked back up at Bakugou, hesitating. Ask us what? He prompted. Well, since I work full-time, I can't take care of Izuku like he needs, and with all his new medical requirements, I just can't. Her voice trembled, and he noticed tears forming in her eyes. He placed a comforting hand on her shoulder and asked what she meant. I want Izuku to stay with you and the rest of your class in your dorm. Bakugou's eyes widened in surprise. I know he might be a burden, and I won't be able to see him often, and it's okay if you all say no. Of course he can keep living with us. Bakugou interrupted, determined. He'd be no burden, and I'll make sure anyone who tries to stop you from visiting him will regret it. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽 looked shocked, her expression shifting to one of joy as tears streamed down her face. Bakugou was taken aback by her sudden reaction and leaned forward to pull her into a hug. They had grown close over the past few months. Why are you crying? He asked, glancing around as others stared. Thank you, Katsuki. Thank you so much for taking such good care of him, she exclaimed, wiping her tears as she pulled away from the embrace. It's nothing, he mumbled, running a hand through his hair. No, really, it eases so much stress off my shoulders. He always spoke so fondly of you, you know. I know he really looked up to you. Bakugou glanced down at Deku's blank expression, puzzled by why he admired him. He had never been anything but harsh. Forcing a smile, he didn't want to dampen 𝐼𝐻𝐽's spirits. She hadn't been this happy in months. After finishing his sandwich, 𝐼𝐻𝐽 ensured Deku had finished his soup before they decided to go outside. Bakugou had never visited the garden before. He had only spent time in Deku's room, the cafeteria, the main lobby, and the restroom. After asking a staff member for directions, they finally made their way to the garden gate on the ground floor. Bakugou pushed the door open and was greeted by the sweet scent of flowers and soil. He held the door open for Deku and 𝐼𝐻𝐽, who was gently pushing him. "Wow," she whispered, taking in the beauty around her. "I've never been in the garden before," Bakugou admitted, also looking around. "Me neither," 𝐼𝐻𝐽 replied. He glanced down at Deku, hoping to see some sign of emotion on his face. Disappointment washed over him when he saw nothing but a blank stare. Deku looked so tired and fragile. "Let's walk around a bit," Bakugou suggested. "Yeah," 𝐼𝐻𝐽 agreed. They strolled along the cobblestone path that wound through the greenery. They came upon a small stream flowing into a pond, where several koi fish swam gracefully. Lilies floated on the water's surface. They paused to watch the fish for a few moments. "Izuku would love this," 𝐼𝐻𝐽 said sadly, holding her son's hand protectively. Bakugou looked down at Deku and expressed how much he missed him. He dipped his hand into the water, flicking droplets onto Deku's face. Deku blinked a few times, startled by the cold sensation. The moment of surprise faded quickly. Bakugou exclaimed with excitement, noting Deku's reaction to the water. 𝐼𝐻𝐽 smiled at him, though her tone suggested she didn't believe Deku would improve. Despite this, Bakugou felt a surge of happiness and ruffled Deku's soft hair, making it even messier. They eventually stood and continued along the path. Bakugou reminisced about how Deku had once wanted a fish tank for his dorm room, recalling how much he enjoyed watching fish at the park. 𝐼𝐻𝐽 reflected on their childhood, mentioning how they had never been able to afford pets, but Deku had always wanted one. She laughed as she remembered how he had brought home stray animals, only to be sad when they had to take them to the shelter. Bakugou chimed in with a memory of the time they had tried to rescue a stray cat together, recalling how hopeful Deku had been about keeping it. Soon, they found themselves in an appealing area filled with roses. 𝐼𝐻𝐽 admired the scenery, wondering why she hadn't visited sooner. Bakugou picked a pale purple rose from a bush, contrasting with the surrounding red blooms, and held it up to Deku's nose. Deku scrunched his face and sneezed, only to return to his emotionless stare. Bakugou stifled a laugh, thinking how adorable Deku's sneeze was. 𝐼𝐻𝐽 teased about the manliness of Deku's sneeze, and Bakugou joked that Kirishima would be jealous. After spending a lovely hour in the garden, they decided to return to Deku's room as 𝐼𝐻𝐽 prepared to leave. She leaned down, cupping Deku's face in her hands, and promised to return the next day, giving him a quick kiss on the uninjured part of his forehead before waving goodbye to Bakugou. He called out to her as she left, then turned to Deku, pushing him closer to the window and pulling over a chair so they could look out together. He interlaced their fingers and expressed how much he missed Deku, pleading for him to come back. As he brushed a stray curl from Deku's face, the setting sun illuminated Deku's vibrant green eyes. Bakugou fought back tears, gripping Deku's hand tighter as they sat in silence, watching the sky change colors. Suddenly, Bakugou remembered the doctor's instructions and jumped up in alarm, realizing 𝐼𝐻𝐽 had already left. He had wanted to help Deku stand while she was still there, but decided they could still try. He turned Deku away from the window to face the room, contemplating how to proceed. He locked the wheels of the wheelchair to keep it steady and placed Deku's feet on the floor, grabbing both of his hands. With a slight pull, he encouraged Deku to rise. To Bakugou's amazement, Deku began to stand, albeit shakily. His heart soared, and a smile broke across his face as he held onto Deku's hands. Overwhelmed with emotion, Bakugou scooped Deku up in his arms and spun him around, tears of joy streaming down his face as he set Deku back on his feet. He laughed, admitting he might have overreacted a bit. Bakugou then steadied Deku by holding his shoulders, ensuring he had a solid footing before slowly letting go. To his relief, Deku remained standing on his own. Bakugou choked back a sob, covering his mouth in disbelief. While he felt joy, he couldn't ignore the sight of Deku's slumped shoulders, arms hanging at his sides, and the dark circles under his eyes. Bakugou smiled and scooped Deku up once again. Instead of spinning him around this time, he carried him over to the bed and gently placed him down on one side. He laid himself on the other side next to Deku. He mentioned that Deku would continue living with them, speaking more to himself than to anyone else. He noted that Deku's mother needed to discuss it with the school first, but he was glad he would still get to see him every day. His smile faded and tears welled up in his eyes. He admitted to himself that he had promised not to cry, but he missed Deku so much. He reflected on how cruel he had been, yet Deku had admired him. Bakugou thought he would be happy not having to deal with Deku's bright smile or his quiet muttering, but he realized he actually missed it. He took a shaky breath. Bakugou acknowledged that he kept saying Deku would get better, but deep down he feared he wouldn't. He struggled to gather himself, feeling the weight of his emotions. It hurt him to think he would never talk to Deku again, never see that beloved smile or watch his face turn bright red in embarrassment. He chuckled through his tears at the memories flooding his mind. He blamed himself for everything, wishing he had done something to protect Deku. Childhood memories rushed back as he gazed at Deku's face, reminding him of the times he had been unkind. Yet, through it all, Deku had remained by his side, never leaving. Even when Bakugou was in danger, Deku had rushed in to help him, despite not having a quirk. Bakugou sobbed, feeling the weight of his regrets. He lamented that he couldn't thank Deku for everything, to express how much he appreciated him. He felt that if he hadn't made Deku feel the need to prove himself, things might have been different. His voice broke as he cried into Deku's chest, but Deku remained still, staring blankly ahead. Bakugou turned his head to look into Deku's eyes, making a promise to take care of him from now on. He smiled sadly and wiped his eyes with his sleeve. They sat together for a while, Bakugou leaning back against the pillows, staring at the ceiling, while Deku rested against the pillows with his head tilted up. Suddenly, Bakugou felt something lean against him. He lifted his head to see that Deku had fallen asleep, slumped over and resting against his shoulder. Bakugou smiled and wrapped his arm around the sleeping boy, planting a gentle kiss on his forehead before resting his head on top of Deku's. He could feel Deku's soft breaths and looked down at him, wishing he could pretend that everything was okay and that Deku would wake up cheerful as always. Almost. As he began to drift off to sleep, the last thing he saw was a mess of white and green curls. Bakugou was startled awake by the sound of screaming and crying. He jumped up in a panic to realize it was Deku, curled into a tight ball and trembling. Tears streamed down his freckled cheeks as he seemed to be in distress, his screams filled with terror, yet Bakugou could tell he was still asleep. In a rush, Bakugou pressed the call button next to the hospital bed and quickly grabbed Deku's arms to prevent him from hurting himself while trying to wake him. He called out to Deku, urging him to wake up. Suddenly, Deku's eyes flew open, and he stopped moving. His eyes were wide with fear, darting to Bakugou's face before returning to a blank stare. Bakugou released Deku's hands, which fell to his sides. It was as if nothing had happened, the only sign being the tears still streaming down Deku's face. The doctor rushed into the room, asking what was wrong and quickly moving to Bakugou and Deku's side. He noticed the tears on Deku's face with confusion. Bakugou began to explain what had happened, but the words faltered. He described how Deku had been sleeping and suddenly started screaming, appearing to have convulsions and crying out in fear. He expressed his shock at how, when he woke Deku, he had returned to this still state, lying on his side with his eyes open and breathing heavily from the earlier distress. The doctor noted that something similar had occurred the previous night, though not as dramatic. Bakugou felt his face flush with anger as he confronted the doctor, demanding to know why he hadn't informed him or Deku's mother about the incident. The doctor replied that it was insignificant, merely whimpering and small movements, and insisted there was no need to notify them. Bakugou argued that it was clearly significant, pointing out that Deku could have hurt himself if he hadn't been there. The doctor sighed, stating they would inform 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽 about these events the following morning, explaining that they seemed to be night terrors, which were not uncommon. He began to mumble to himself about the oddity of night terrors occurring in someone in a catatonic state, suggesting that it didn't make sense. Bakugou, irritated by the mumbling that reminded him too much of Deku's own habits, demanded to know if there was anything the doctor could do. The doctor explained that due to the medications Deku was already on, they couldn't do much until he was weaned off some of the pain meds after leaving the hospital. Bakugou sighed, realizing that Deku would have to endure this for another month. He snapped at the doctor not to tell him what to do, glancing at his watch and realizing he was running late for school. He muttered to himself about the curfew and reluctantly prepared to leave, casting one last worried look at Deku before slipping out the door. It had been about a month since Deku had woken up. During that time, the nurses had helped him not only stand but also walk. He was able to eat solid foods and drink from a cup with assistance. However, he continued to suffer from terrible night terrors, crying out in fear and appearing to be in distress during these episodes. The doctors found it peculiar, as night terrors typically affected children and lasted only 10 to 15 minutes, while Deku's episodes continued until someone woke him. Given his lack of control over his mind, it was even more unusual for him to experience them. In this time, 𝐼𝐻𝐬 had spoken with the school, and after much discussion, they agreed to allow Deku to continue living at the dorms. She would have access to the school grounds whenever she wanted to visit him. Mr. Aizawa in Class 1A decided that one student would stay back each school day to care for Deku, rotating daily to ensure that no one missed too much school, as their education remained a priority. His care would not be left solely to the students. Bakugou proudly presented Deku's red sneakers to 𝐼𝐻𝐬, who laughed and remarked that he still wore them. Bakugou explained that they were his favorite shoes and better than the hospital slippers. They were preparing to take Deku back to the dorms, with 𝐼𝐻𝐬 busy filling out paperwork while Bakugou attempted to comb Deku's hair. He expressed frustration at how messy it was, noting that most of Deku's hair had turned white, with only a few green highlights remaining. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 chuckled, stating that Deku had always had a lot of hair, making it untamable. After a few more minutes, she finished the paperwork and handed it to one of the nurses. Bakugou complained about how long they had been there, to which 𝐼𝐻𝐬 playfully scolded him, suggesting he could handle it all next time. Bakugou then turned to Deku, helping him out of his slippers and into his red sneakers, commenting that he looked more like himself already. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 smiled at the boys and suggested they get Deku to his feet, noting that Aizawa should be waiting for them. Bakugou helped Deku stand, steadying him for a moment before leading him toward the door, with Deku staring blankly at the floor. He was still in his hospital uniform, but they would change his clothes once they reached the dorms, where all of Deku's clothes awaited him. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 took Deku's other hand, walking in sync with the two boys as they made their way out. Bakugou spotted the doctor at the end of the hall and called out to him. He noticed 𝐼𝐻𝐬 and Izuku making their way toward the elevator, which he happened to be next to. The doctor greeted them warmly, expressing how much he would miss their presence. He placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder, sharing a smile. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 reminded them that they still needed to come in every month for checkups as she pressed the elevator button. The doctor offered his best wishes, and she returned the smile as the elevator doors opened. A few people rushed out, and once they cleared the way, 𝐼𝐻𝐬 took Izuku's hand and stepped inside, with Bakugou following closely behind. As the doors closed, 𝐼𝐻𝐬 waved goodbye. Bakugou felt his phone vibrate with a notification from Mr. Aizawa, confirming he had arrived. He informed 𝐼𝐻𝐬 that Aizawa was there to pick them up since she didn't have a car. Although she tried to maintain a cheerful demeanor, Bakugou could sense her underlying sadness about him living in the dorms instead of at home. She would miss him and worry about his well-being, but at least she could visit. When the elevator reached the ground floor, Bakugou led Izuku out into the lobby. The receptionist called out her farewells, and 𝐼𝐻𝐬 waved back, having seen her daily for the past 4 months. However, Bakugou felt no attachment to the hospital. After navigating through a series of goodbyes, they finally reached the parking lot, which proved to be more challenging than expected. They scanned the rows of cars until they spotted Mr. Aizawa peeking out from the driver's seat. As they approached, Aizawa greeted Bakugou with a teasing remark about being Yue's #1 problem child. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 laughed at the comment as Bakugou helped Izuku into the back seat, ensuring he was comfortably buckled in while 𝐼𝐻𝐬 settled into the front passenger seat. Once he was sure Izuku was okay, Bakugou climbed into the back seat next to him. He intertwined his fingers with Izuku's, holding on tightly. 𝐼𝐬𝐽 mentioned that the class was eager to see Izuku and that they had planned a welcome party, inviting 𝐼𝐮𝐽 to join. She expressed her enthusiasm about getting to know his classmates better. Bakugou squeezed Izuku's hand, determined to stay by his side that evening. He took a moment to observe Izuku's face, noticing the new freckles that stood out against his paler skin. It was clear that Izuku hadn't seen much sunlight during his time in the hospital. His green eyes remained vibrant, though one bore a slight scar, and there was a noticeable scar across his forehead that weighed heavily on Bakugou's heart. He missed Izuku's green hair. As 𝐼𝐬𝐽 and 𝐼𝐮𝐽 chatted in the front, Bakugou focused on Izuku's arms, which were marked with scars from past battles, including a prominent red one on his upper right arm. There were also some newer scars from surgeries and other painful experiences. The drive to the dorm was brief, lasting about 25 minutes, and soon they arrived. Jiraiya welcomed them, pointing out that there was food in the kitchen, mentioning that Bakugou had woken up early to help Sato prepare it. 𝐼𝐮𝐽 expressed her surprise and admiration at Bakugou's cooking skills, which made him scoff as he wrapped an arm around Izuku. 𝐼𝐮𝐽 thanked everyone for organizing the welcome for Izuku, her eyes glistening with tears of gratitude. Eventually, everyone gathered in the living area, and Jiraiya turned on some music before taking a seat. 𝐼𝐬𝐽 suddenly stood back up, stating that he had forgotten something before rushing out the door. Everyone looked over, confused. All Might, along with a few others, wondered what that was about, but after a few moments, they shrugged it off, attributing it to 𝐼𝐬𝐽's usual behavior. 𝗟𝗏𝐽 had moved to another spot to let 𝐼𝐮𝐽 sit next to Deku. Bakugou, however, refused to move for anyone, keeping his arm protectively around him. They all talked and laughed, and a few went into the kitchen, returning with food and placing it on the coffee table for everyone. 𝐼𝐮𝐽 asked 𝗟𝗏𝐽 if calling him Deku meant something. 𝗟𝗏𝐽 laughed nervously, explaining that it was just a nickname she and Bakugou had for him. Kaminari chimed in, revealing that it was also Deku's hero name. 𝐼𝐮𝐽 was surprised, admitting she had never thought about it before. She rambled on, and Bakugou noted where Deku got his mumbling habit. Curious, 𝐼𝐮𝐽 asked if all of them had hero names. Mineta proudly announced his as grape juice, despite its silliness. 𝐼𝐮𝐽 expressed her longing to hear everyone's hero names and real names to get to know them better. Kaminari introduced himself as 𝐴𝐻𝐴𝐵𝐿, and Momo reminded him to use his inside voice. One by one, the others shared their names. Ijiro Kirishima as 𝗏𝗏𝐼𝐻𝐴, Ochako 𝗟𝗏𝐽 as 𝗟𝗏𝐵𝐸, 𝗏𝗏𝐼𝐻𝐴 as 𝐶𝐿ophane, Tsu Azui as 𝗏𝗏𝗏, Momo Yaoyorozu as 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 Toru Hagakure as invisible girl, Tenya Ida as ingenium, Yuga Aoyama as can't stop twinkling, Mina Ishido as Pinky, Masahiro Ojiro as Tailman, Mezu Shoji as Tentacle, Kyuka as Earphone Jack, Fumikage Tokoyami as Tsukuyami, Rikido Sato as Sugarman, Koji Koda as Anima, and Shoto Todoroki. Mineta finished with his own name, leaving 𝐼𝐮𝐽 amazed by the young heroes in training. She looked over at her son, asking if his hero name was really Deku. Bakugou confirmed that it meant a lot to him, which prompted Kirishima to tease him about being aware of that. 𝐼𝐮𝐽 then asked Bakugou for his hero name, and laughter erupted among the group. 𝗟𝗏 joked that all of Bakugou's ideas had been rejected, and Bakugou angrily denied it. Tsu added that they were right, and Bakugou mumbled that he had come up with a new name. When Mina encouraged him to share, he reluctantly revealed it was dynamite, prompting more laughter. Suddenly, 𝐼𝐬𝐽 walked in with 𝐼𝐻𝐴 standing nervously behind him. 𝐼𝐻𝐴's face lit up when she saw Deku, and she ran over, jumping into his lap and giving him a big hug. 𝐼𝐬𝐽 cautioned her to be careful as he shut the door behind him. Kirishima greeted 𝗟𝗏𝐽 with a big smile, but she was too busy hugging Deku to respond. She expressed how much she missed him, and 𝐼𝐬𝐽 explained that he hadn't taken her to the hospital because she really wanted to see him. 𝐼𝐮𝐽 asked who 𝗟𝗏𝐽 was, and 𝗟𝗏𝗏 introduced herself with a smile. 𝐼𝐮𝐽 noted that 𝗟𝗏𝗏 looked quite young, prompting 𝐼𝐬𝐽 to share that Midoriya had saved her life, which was why she loved him so much. 𝐼𝐮𝐽 was taken aback, looking at Deku in disbelief. 𝗟𝗏𝗏 proudly confirmed that he had protected her, and 𝐮𝐽's confusion turned into tears of joy. 𝗟𝗏𝗏𝗏 and Hagakure rushed over to give 𝐮𝐽 a comforting hug, acknowledging that all Deku ever wanted was to save people. 𝐼𝐻𝐬, however, was focused on Deku, asking what was wrong with him as she touched his cheek. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 wiped her eyes and explained that while his body was okay, his mind had been hurt. Panicking, 𝐼𝐻𝐬 asked if he would get better, but 𝐼𝐻𝐬 choked out that he wouldn't. 𝐼𝐻𝐬's face scrunched up as tears filled her eyes, and she cried out that he was supposed to be okay because he was a hero. She threw herself at 𝐼𝐻𝐬, who held the young girl in her lap, soothing her with gentle strokes of her hair, her motherly instincts kicking in. Izuku kindly asked if she wanted to go back, but she abruptly sat up and exclaimed that she did not. Wiping her eyes, she put on a big smile and declared her longing to stay with Deku. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 was holding back tears, realizing it was the first time she had admitted that Deku might not get better. She had known it all along but had struggled to voice it. Throughout the remainder of the party, 𝐼𝐻𝐬 alternated between sitting on 𝐼𝐻𝐬's lap and Deku's. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 felt an instant affection for the young girl. Noticing that Deku was still in his hospital scrubs, Bakugou suggested that he should help get Deku into some pajamas since it was getting late. Everyone agreed, glancing at the time. Kirishima added that Deku couldn't stay in those clothes forever, and 𝐼𝐻𝐬 offered to help, but Bakugou insisted he could manage it alone, teasing that Deku would be embarrassed if his mom had to dress him. Bakugou led Deku to the elevator, pressing the button for the second floor. He knew Deku could navigate stairs, but he wanted to avoid any risk of him getting hurt or overexerting himself. When the doors opened, they stepped out and made their way to Deku's room, which was filled with all might merchandise. Bakugou chuckled at the sight, teasing Deku about being such a fanboy. He helped Deku sit on the bed and began searching through the closet for pajamas. Spotting a familiar set, he pulled them out and walked back to the bed. As he unfolded the nightshirt, he turned to Deku and gently lifted the hem of his t-shirt, pulling it over his head. He tried not to focus on the scar that ran along Deku's midsection, but it was hard to ignore. Tears threatened to spill, but he fought them back. Deku had lost a lot of weight over the past few months. The muscles he had worked so hard for were gone, leaving him scrawny yet still marked by the scars of past battles. Bakugou looked up at Deku's face and noticed the cloudiness of his left eye, now marred by scars. It saddened him to think that his friend was blind in that eye. Pulling Deku into a hug, Bakugou tangled his fingers in Deku's soft white hair, feeling the weight of guilt and emotion. After a moment, he composed himself and slipped the shirt over Deku's head. He removed Deku's beloved red sneakers and replaced them with a pair of sweatpants he found in the closet, finishing by putting slippers on him as well. Bakugou declared that Deku looked much more comfortable now and carefully helped him stand. As he interlaced their fingers and started to lead him out the door, he felt a squeeze from Deku's hand. His eyes widened in surprise. Could it be that Deku was getting better? He quickly turned to face him, searching for any sign of awareness, but found only a blank stare. Bakugou squeezed Deku's shoulders, desperate for any response. When nothing came, he sighed, realizing he had been foolish to expect a sudden change. He must have imagined the squeeze. As they approached the elevator, he felt it again. Deku squeezed his hand, this time with more strength. Bakugou spun around, excitement bubbling within him. He asked if Deku was getting better or trying to communicate, but once again, he was met with silence and a blank expression. He pondered whether it was merely a muscle spasm instead, feeling a wave of sadness wash over him. He missed Deku so much and brushed his white hair back from his eyes, holding both of Deku's hands in his as he looked down, lost in thought for a moment before snapping back to reality. They decided it was time to head back, knowing others would be wondering about their whereabouts. With a sad smile, he pressed the elevator button, and the doors opened. He led Deku inside, ignoring the hand squeeze this time. As they stepped out of the elevator, Kirishima called out to Bakugou, asking him to bring Midoriya over since 𝐼𝐻𝐬 was leaving and wanted to say goodbye. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 dashed over with her arms wide open, but being too short, she hugged Deku around his legs. Bakugou rolled his eyes and picked her up, allowing her to wrap her arms around Deku's neck. With a bright smile, 𝐼𝐻𝐬 bid farewell to Deku as Bakugou set her down. She then ran over to Izuku, grabbing his hand. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 waved happily at 𝐼𝐻𝐬, wishing her goodbye, while 𝗟𝗏 shouted that they would see her soon as she and Izuku exited through the door. Kirishima called out a good night to 𝐼𝐻𝐬, and the entire class joined in to say their farewells. All Might decided it was time for him to leave as well. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐃 spoke up, mentioning that she should probably head out too, not wanting to intrude on everyone's space as it was getting late. Momo reassured her that she wasn't intruding, smiling up at her. 𝗟𝗏𝐼𝐜 added that it was wonderful getting to know Deku's mom. Bakugou returned to the couch, gently setting Deku down while still holding his hand. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐃 insisted that she appreciated their kindness but needed to go. Mina chimed in, inviting her to come back anytime. Mina approached Deku and pulled him into a warm hug, expressing her love for him. She looked into his eyes, promising to visit again in a few days, and playfully warned him not to get into any trouble. After giving him a kiss on the forehead and one last hug, she thanked everyone for their warm welcome. As 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐃 prepared to leave, Bakugou offered her a reassuring smile, and everyone waved goodbye as she closed the door behind her. 𝗟𝗏𝐼𝐜 remarked on how much 𝐒𝐮𝐃 loved Deku, her smile fading as she added that it made the situation all the more bittersweet. She settled down next to Deku. Tokoyami inquired about where Deku would stay that night. 𝗟𝗏𝐼𝐜 was puzzled by the question, and Iida explained that Midoriya couldn't be alone in his room due to night terrors that could lead to him hurting himself. 𝗟𝗏𝐼𝐜 recalled this detail. Bakugou declared that Deku would stay in his room, mentioning his experience with such situations. He had been at the hospital several times when Deku fell asleep and needed to be awakened from those episodes, which the doctors had said were worsening. 𝗟𝗏𝐼𝐜 noted Bakugou's choice of clothing, commenting that it was much better than the hospital uniform. Iida checked his watch and stood up abruptly, insisting that everyone head to bed since they had class the next day. Bakugou glared at Iida's robotic movements as Mina groaned about the time. Despite the protests, Iida insisted that everyone go to bed immediately. With reluctant groans, they got up and made their way toward the elevator. Bakugou took Deku's hand, leading him along as they headed to the 4th floor where Bakugou's room was located. He shouted for everyone to get out of his way, pushing through the crowd to ensure Deku wouldn't have to walk up the stairs. Iida urged them to let Midoriya onto the elevator, and they finally managed to squeeze into the small space, pressing the button for the 4th floor. They were packed in with Kirishima, Kaminari, 𝗬𝗏𝗧𝗟𝗘, and 𝐻𝐵𝐺𝐬, while the others had to either take the stairs or wait for the elevator to return. 𝐻𝐵𝐺𝐬 complained about Kaminari stepping on her foot, to which he apologized, stepping back and accidentally bumping into Deku. Bakugou shouted at him protectively, pulling Deku closer. Kaminari quickly apologized to Midoriya, and 𝗬𝗏 reminded him to use his inside voice. Kirishima asked Bakugou if he planned to miss school the next day to stay with Midoriya, given that he was spending the night in Bakugou's room. Bakugou snapped back, refusing to share any information. Kirishima took that as a yes and laughed. They reached the 3rd floor, where 𝗻𝐵𝐺𝐬 and Kaminari exited. Finally, they arrived at the 4th floor, and Deku, Bakugou, and Kirishima stepped out, leaving 𝗍𝗏 and 𝗬𝗏 on the elevator. Kirishima called out a cheerful goodnight before disappearing into his room. Bakugou scowled in response and pulled Deku into his own room, slamming the door behind them. He surveyed the space. He contemplated offering Deku the bed, but mentioned that he had nothing to sleep on himself. Otherwise, he would have taken the floor. The situation led to the conclusion that they would have to share. With a swift motion, Bakugou lifted Deku and set him down on the side of the bed closest to the wall, ensuring he wouldn't fall off during the night. He pulled the blankets up and tucked them around Deku, then jumped into bed beside him. Bakugou remarked that Deku needed to stop having night terrors so he could sleep alone. Deku's eyes appeared heavy, as if he were on the verge of sleep. Bakugou smiled, resting his arms behind his head and gazing at the ceiling. Before long, he felt Deku shifting and realized he had fallen asleep. The doctors had found it peculiar that Deku could move in his sleep when he couldn't do so while awake. As Bakugou began to drift off himself, he thought about how much he missed Deku's cheerful smile and vibrant green hair. Suddenly, Bakugou was jolted awake. Deku was experiencing a night terror. He was screaming, tears streaming down his face, and his body seemed to twist in distress. The sound of his cries was filled with both pain and fear. Curled up tightly, he appeared to be trying to protect himself. It broke Bakugou's heart to see his friends so frightened and in turmoil. Bakugou called out to Deku, narrowly avoiding a kick. He urged him to wake up while shaking him gently. This only caused Deku to scream louder, as if responding to the touch. His body shook with each sob, pausing only for shaky breaths. Feeling frustrated, Bakugou didn't want to disturb their classmates or have them come to help. He wrapped his arms around the trembling boy, pulling him into his lap and gently rocking back and forth. Deku seemed to sense the comfort and began to uncoil, attempting to push Bakugou away. Bakugou whispered soothingly, petting Deku's hair and trying to calm him down rather than wake him. Gradually, Deku's pained screams quieted, transforming into soft whimpers. He stopped thrashing and curled up again, though not as tightly as before. Though still crying, Deku appeared less frightened, his sobs still shaky. Bakugou continued to reassure him, cradling him gently. Suddenly, Deku's eyes shot open, a look of terror crossing his face. His gaze darted to Bakugou, and he called out his name in fear. Moments later, his expression relaxed, and the emotion vanished, leaving behind a blank stare. Bakugou felt a lump form in his throat, his jaw dropping in shock. Tears began to sting his eyes. Did Deku just say his name? He called out to Deku, holding the now still boy closer and searching his face for any sign of recognition. Gently shaking him, he expressed his longing to help, feeling overwhelmed by the realization that Deku was aware for a few moments after waking. After calming himself, Bakugou glanced at the glowing clock beside his bed. It read 2:47 a.m. He promised to stay up with Deku for the rest of the night, comfortingly running his fingers through Deku's hair and wiping away the lingering tears from his face. Although Deku's eyes were open, they seemed distant, staring through him. Bakugou mumbled an apology for waking him up. Just then, a knock sounded at the door. Kirishima's voice called out, asking if they were okay. Bakugou replied that they were fine, explaining that Deku had just experienced a night terror but was all right now. Kirishima expressed concern, mentioning that he had heard screaming followed by silence, prompting him to check if everything was all right. Bakugou reassured him again, telling him to go back to his room. After Kirishima's footsteps faded away, Bakugou returned his focus to Deku, determined to help him through the night. Bakugou held Deku in his lap until he fell back asleep, subconsciously rocking them both back and forth. This was so much different than how he would have treated Deku a few years earlier. He thought sadly about how he had always treated him poorly. He reflected on Deku's desperation to be a hero, knowing he lacked the means to achieve that dream. Bakugou had believed that perhaps he could deter Deku from pursuing it. He spoke quietly to himself, regretting that he hadn't supported Deku, wishing he had built him up instead of tearing him down. He felt a wave of sorrow as he held Deku closer, acknowledging the pain and fear etched on his friend's face. Bakugou's voice trembled with emotion as he expressed his remorse, realizing the weight of his actions. He quickly covered his mouth to muffle his sobs, not wanting to disturb his classmates. As he looked down at Deku, he noticed his eyes growing heavy again. An hour had passed, and Bakugou could feel his own eyelids growing heavy. He fought against the urge to sleep, determined to keep watch over Deku. Carefully, he lifted him and placed him back onto the bed, knowing it would be more comfortable than his lap. Deku had nearly slipped into another night terror a few times, but Bakugou had managed to soothe him before it could escalate. He was trying hard not to wake him, understanding how exhausted Deku looked. He needed every moment of rest he could get. Before he knew it, morning arrived. He could hear his classmates' alarms going off and the sounds of them dragging themselves out of bed. Suddenly, his door swung open to reveal an energetic Kirishima, who greeted them cheerfully and opened the blinds wide. Bakugou hissed at Kirishima, reminding him that Deku was still sleeping. Kirishima, however, ignored the comment and noticed the dark bags under Bakugou's eyes, asking if he had slept at all. Bakugou snapped back, insisting it was none of Kirishima's business and threatening to blast him out if he didn't leave. Kirishima raised his hands in defeat and backed out of the room, closing the door behind him. Bakugou muttered under his breath, annoyed, and turned to see Deku's eyes open now. He felt a pang of frustration, realizing he had inadvertently woken him up. The events of the night flooded back into his mind, and he sighed, pulling Deku into a big. He wished for a sign from Deku, wanting to help him. But when he looked into Deku's eyes, he saw the same blank expression he had worn for the past month. Bakugou sighed again, reaching for Deku's waist and lifting him up. He stood him on the floor, mentioning that the others would want to say goodbye before they left. He led Deku towards the door, walking slowly enough to ensure he wouldn't stumble. Everyone was already in the bathroom getting ready for the day. Taking advantage of the moment, Bakugou headed straight for the elevator, pressing the button for the first floor. They stood there for a few minutes, hand in hand, until the doors opened. Bakugou stepped out and plopped down on the couch after gently sitting Deku down first. He pondered what they might do for the day, speaking more to himself than to Deku. His thoughts were interrupted when 𝗟𝗏 threw herself onto the couch, excitedly greeting Deku and wrapping her arms around him. Bakugou jumped up, demanding she get off. 𝗟𝗏 pouted, insisting that she just wanted to give Deku a hug since he would be spending the day with Bakugou. Suddenly, she asked suspiciously what had happened the night before, noting that it had sounded like someone was in distress. Bakugou explained that those were Deku's night terrors and told her to get used to it. 𝗟𝗏 gasped, realizing the severity of the situation, and turned to Deku to give him another hug. Bakugou shouted again, warning her to get off, igniting small explosions in his palms as he expressed his concern that she might hurt Deku. Iida stepped off the elevator and made his way towards the kitchen, reminding Bakugou about his language. Bakugou, irritated, shouted back at Iida, dismissing his comment. Iida continued making toast, determined to update Bakugou on their class activities after they returned. Bakugou insisted he could handle things himself, pushing 𝗟𝗏 away from Deku. He was frustrated, demanding her to get off. 𝗟𝗏 whined, defending her right to be close to her friend. Bakugou growled that Deku was not his friend, shooting her a glare. 𝗟𝗏, with a hint of sarcasm, noted that she could tell Bakugou was upset. Just then, Todoroki came down the stairs, giving Bakugou a piercing stare and asking about the screaming he heard from Bakugou's room the previous night. Bakugou, clearly agitated, explained that it was Deku's night terrors and that he wasn't doing anything wrong. He was upset that they were jumping to conclusions. Todoroki reassured him as long as he wasn't doing anything to Midoriya. Bakugou, outraged, questioned why he would ever do something like that, insisting he didn't hate Deku, though his voice was quieter than usual. 𝗟𝗏 teased him, prompting Bakugou to snap back at her. She laughed and went into the kitchen to prepare her breakfast. 𝗍𝗷, along with Sato and Mina, joined them, laughing about Bakugou's morning mood. Bakugou shot back at 𝗍𝗷, who was curious about the noise from the night before. Iida explained it was Deku's night terrors, and 𝗟𝗏 added that they had gotten worse. Bakugou sank back into the couch next to Deku, feeling the weight of the situation. Mineta bounced down the stairs with Kirishima, asking if anyone had been with the girls. Momo glared at him, warning him to stop his inappropriate comments. 𝗍𝗷 expressed his disgust, and Bakugou quietly noted how loud Deku's screams were, realizing the whole class had heard him. As the rest of the class gathered for breakfast, they prepared to head to school. Hagakure called out her goodbyes, and Momo whispered to Iida, questioning if it was wise to leave Bakugou alone with Deku. Iida reassured her that Bakugou seemed gentler towards Deku than before. 𝗟𝗏, wanting to say goodbye, rushed over to Deku and tackled him in a hug. Bakugou, furious, stormed over, warning her to get off before she hurt him. 𝗟𝗏, startled by Bakugou's anger, quickly jumped up and yelled her goodbye before racing out the door. Bakugou sighed in relief after she left, watching the class walk toward the school. He turned to Deku, asking if he wanted breakfast. Deku suggested rice and eggs, and Bakugou began preparing the meal, glancing back at Deku to ensure he was okay. Once the food was ready, he brought it into the living area, relieved that Iida wasn't there to lecture him about eating in the common space. He served Deku first, making sure he ate before attending to his own now-cold meal. After they finished, he tossed the dishes in the sink, planning to wash them later. Suddenly, Bakugou had an idea. He told Deku to stay put as he dashed upstairs to find a pair of earbuds he had seen the night before. After searching through the closet, he spotted them on the nightstand and quickly grabbed them. Returning downstairs, he found Deku just as he had left him. Bakugou jumped onto the couch beside Deku and opened his music app, thinking that maybe music would help bring Deku out of his trance. He plugged the earbuds into his phone, hoping to provide some comfort. He opened his playlist and searched through it, trying to find something he thought Deku would have liked. He smiled as he clicked on a song and placed the earbuds in Deku's ears. Turning up the volume, he sat back, waiting for some kind of reaction. Nothing. He waited until the song finished and picked another one, staring at Deku, hoping for anything to happen. Bakugou sighed, feeling disappointed when there was no response from Deku. It was always about Deku and his music. He had thought this time would be different. Turning off the music, he pulled out the earbuds, wrapped them up, and placed them on the coffee table in front of them. He suggested watching a movie, glancing at the remote next to him, noting they had several hours to fill. He swiped the remote and began scrolling through the watch list. Eventually, he picked something and wrapped his arm protectively around Deku. About 30 minutes into the movie, he noticed Deku's head dipping. It seemed he was on the brink of sleep. Bakugou chuckled, teasing that Deku was the one who had gotten to sleep the night before. He scooped Deku into his lap and continued watching the film. Before long, Deku was asleep, cuddled up against Bakugou's chest. Bakugou felt his own eyes growing heavy. A nap wouldn't hurt, right? He glanced down at the boy in his lap, thinking that Deku seemed fine. Just a small one, he thought, as his eyes drifted shut, and he soon fell asleep. As Bakugou slowly woke up, he heard frantic whispering. He rubbed his eyes, realizing he had been sleeping with Deku still on his lap. His friends were gathered around him, and he quickly lifted Deku off and gently set him down on the cushion beside him. He shouted at his friends, asking what they were staring at. 𝗟𝗏 teased him about falling asleep with Deku. Bakugou, feeling flustered, yelled for everyone to leave. Just then Iida entered, noticing Deku still in his pajamas and expressing his disapproval. Iida decided to take Deku to get dressed, leading him toward the elevator before Bakugou could say anything. 𝐼𝐼𝐻 laughed, telling Bakugou not to feel bad, while 𝐒𝐿 complained about being tired from a rescue exercise they had done earlier. Bakugou rolled his eyes, sinking into the couch. Iida soon returned with Deku in tow, and everyone looked to see what outfit he had chosen. 𝗟𝗏 remarked that Deku looked like he was about to go to church, as he was dressed in a blue polo shirt, dress breathes, dress shoes, and a leather belt. Tsu pointed out Iida's fondness for polos, while Kirishima noted that Deku looked like Bakugou's dad. Bakugou, upset with the outfit choice, exclaimed that he didn't even know Deku owned slacks. Kirishima decided to take matters into his own hands, jumping up and grabbing Deku's arm to take him back to the elevator for a change. As the doors shut, Iida sat down on the couch, crossing his arms and pouting about the outfit. 𝗟𝗏 gently reminded him that his own style was similar. They all waited for the elevator doors to open again. When they did, Kirishima strutted out proudly with a brightly colored Deku, who was now wearing a neon orange and yellow camo t-shirt, white shorts, red Crocs, and a red belt. They all stared at the unusual outfit, a moment of silence hanging in the air before someone finally spoke up. He looked back nervously, anticipating a reaction. "Burn it," 𝗟𝗏 suggested. He protested, expressing his disbelief. Todoroki approached and placed a hand on Deku's shoulder, guiding him back toward the elevator. "You can do it, Todoroki," 𝗟𝗏 encouraged. "Crocs? Really?" Tsu raised an eyebrow at Kirishima. "They're comfortable," he insisted, lifting his foot to show off his footwear. "Come on, you guys, we used to see him every day. It can't be that hard to dress him," Mina chuckled. A few minutes later, Todoroki returned with Deku in a new outfit. This time, Deku wore a black turtleneck sweater, khaki shorts, tall knit socks, and black sneakers. "Why did you put him in a turtleneck?" 𝗟𝗏 exclaimed. "It's the middle of August." Bakugou interjected, clearly flustered. "It's very unsafe to dress this way in this weather," Iida added, his voice serious. "Yeah, he could get heat stroke or something," Kirishima said, concern etched on his face. "Todoroki, not everyone can regulate their body temperature like you," Tsu remarked. Todoroki looked down, realizing his mistake. "Oh," he acknowledged. "Okay, my turn." 𝗟𝗏 beamed, jumping up and taking Deku's hand. Iida urged her to hurry, worried about Deku overheating. "That was a really good try, Todoroki," Mina smiled at him. They waited for 𝗟𝗏𝐼 to return, and when the elevator doors opened, she emerged with Deku, now dressed in an oversized graphic tee, shorts, and white sandals. 𝗟𝗏𝐼, none of those clothes fit him, Todoroki pointed out. The shirt's way too big, and the shorts are too small, Kirishima laughed. It is very important that Midoriya wears clothes that properly fit him. Iida exclaimed, gesturing animatedly. I didn't want to pick anything fancy in case they might get ruined, she defended. That's it. Frog face, help me pick an outfit for him. Bakugou declared, standing up. Okay, Tsu agreed, following him. He pulled Deku back onto the elevator with determination. After a few more minutes, the trio returned. Wow, that looks really good. 𝗟𝗏𝐼 exclaimed upon seeing them. It's very Midoriya, Todoroki added. It looks like Midoriya picked the clothes himself. Kirishima nodded in approval. Bakugou and Tsu had dressed him in a dusty blue shirt with T-shirt written across the front, navy cargo shorts, and his classic red sneakers. Bakugou picked out most of the clothes, Tsu said, glancing at Bakugou. None of you are allowed to pick outfits for him anymore. Got it? Bakugou asserted. The rest of the day passed without incident. Bakugou faced teasing again for Deku falling asleep on him and for choosing the best outfit. Eventually, they finished dinner and relaxed in the living area, despite Iida's repeated attempts to get them to do their homework. So, who's Midoriya staying with tonight? Kaminari asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. Yeah, we can't just stick him with Bakugou every night, Kirishima joked. He can stay in my room. 𝗟𝗏𝐼 raised her hand enthusiastically. That's not a good idea, Bakugou replied, sounding uninterested. Oh come on. I can handle it. I just have to wake him up if he starts having a night terror. I think I can manage that, she insisted. Okay, he'll stay in 𝗟𝗏𝐼's room tonight. What about the night after that? Iida asked, trying to establish a schedule. Sleepover. Kaminari shouted excitedly. I'll watch him after 𝗟𝗏𝐼. Bakugou rolled his eyes in annoyance. They gradually devised a schedule, rotating through most of the class, except for Mineta and others who opted out. They decided that whoever watched him that night would also stay with him the next day instead of attending class. Fast forward to 8:30, Iida was urging everyone to go to bed. Bakugou didn't mind, as he usually went to bed around that time anyway, but being ordered around still irritated him. Come on, Deku. 𝗟𝗏𝐼 called, grabbing his hand and leading him toward the elevator. At least he wouldn't be too far from her, Bakugou thought, knowing 𝗟𝗏𝐼's room was on the same floor. He bounded up the stairs to his room, quickly changed into his night clothes, and headed to the bathroom to brush his teeth. There, he encountered Kirishima, who was on his way to do the same. Kirishima greeted Bakugou with a cheerful smile, but Bakugou responded with a growl, clearly annoyed. Kirishima teased him about Midoriya not staying in his room that night, playfully patting Bakugou on the shoulder. Although Bakugou glared back, he didn't shake off Kirishima's hand. Kirishima reassured him that 𝗟𝗏𝐼 would likely let him say goodnight to Midoriya, which only earned him another scowl from Bakugou as they entered the bathroom. From inside the girls' bathroom, 𝗟𝗏𝐼 called out for help, struggling with Midoriya's hair. Bakugou couldn't help but chuckle quietly to himself, thinking about how Midoriya's hair was always a challenge. Later, Bakugou sulked back to his room, having waited outside the girls' bathroom for a chance to see Midoriya. After giving up, he returned to his room, feeling frustrated that he wouldn't be able to say goodnight to Midoriya. He sighed and slammed the door behind him. He flopped onto his bed, feeling mentally drained from the day. For almost 7 months, all he had wanted was to see Midoriya, and now that he was here, it felt overwhelming. Yet, seeing him was still all he desired. Bakugou groaned into his pillow, staring at the ceiling as he let his eyes grow heavy. He decided to surrender to sleep, hoping to catch up on rest. Suddenly, loud pounding on his door jolted him awake. Rubbing his eyes groggily, he listened to the frantic sounds coming from outside. Bakugou, please open the door. You need to help Deku. I can't wake him up. 𝗟𝗏𝐼's voice was filled with urgency and distress. Bakugou jumped out of bed and rushed to the door, flinging it open to find a visibly upset 𝗟𝗏𝐼, tears streaming down her face. What's going on? He asked, concern creeping into his voice as he noticed her distress. "It's Deku. I can't get him to wake up," she sobbed, her shoulders slumping in relief at seeing him. Bakugou felt a surge of worry as he hurried to her room, 𝗟𝗏𝐼 following closely behind. He peeked inside and saw Midoriya curled up on the floor, trembling and crying out in fear. Bakugou's heart sank as he heard Midoriya's terrified cries, pleading for safety. He was clearly in distress, and Bakugou felt a rush of determination to help him. Without hesitation, he scooped Midoriya up and sat on 𝗟𝗏𝐼's bed, holding him in his lap. Midoriya continued to convulse and cry out, his fear palpable. "Hey, it's okay. You're safe," Bakugou whispered, gently rocking him back and forth. He stroked Midoriya's hair, trying to soothe him. This was the worst Bakugou had seen Midoriya during his night terrors, and he felt a deep sense of urgency to calm him down. Kirishima and 𝗟𝗏𝐼 stood at the door, concerned but unsure of how to help. Bakugou focused solely on Midoriya, who was still trembling but had stopped flailing. He continued to rock him gently, humming softly and stroking his hair, trying to ease his fear. Midoriya's sobs transformed from panic to something more subdued, but the terror was still evident. It broke Bakugou's heart to see him like this. He was used to seeing Midoriya cry, but this was different. 𝗟𝗏𝐼 tried to reassure the others, urging them to give Bakugou space as he took care of Midoriya. Bakugou felt a sense of responsibility wash over him, determined to help Midoriya through this moment of fear. Mina expressed her concern, noting that Deku looked shaken up. Bakugou, clearly irritated, demanded that they close the door. 𝗟𝗏𝐼 quickly complied, shutting the door behind them. Deku had calmed down considerably but still trembled, a soft whimper escaping him. He whispered, asking where his friends were and why they hadn't come to save him yet. A tear slipped down his cheek as he wondered if they had forgotten about him. Bakugou felt a wave of emotion as tears threatened to spill from his eyes. He apologized to Deku, assuring him that they hadn't forgotten. He hugged Deku tightly, trying to provide comfort. Deku's voice was quieter now as he asked where Bakugou was. Bakugou, overwhelmed with emotion, sobbed that he was right there and that he was sorry. Suddenly, Deku jolted, falling out of Bakugou's embrace and onto the floor. Bakugou rushed to him, noticing that Deku's eyes were wide open, but he seemed disoriented. Deku struggled to stand but fell to his knees, his speech trailing off as he slipped back into a trance. Bakugou was momentarily frozen in shock before panic set in. He cried out for Deku, falling to his knees in front of him. He shook Deku, desperate for a response, when he heard the door open and light flooded the room. Kirishima shouted at Bakugou, warning him that he might hurt Deku. Bakugou, in his distress, continued shaking Deku until he was forcibly pulled away by Kirishima. He fought against his friend, insisting that he needed to help Deku. 𝗟𝗏𝐼 and Mina rushed to Deku's side, while Kirishima restrained Bakugou. Realizing he was no longer fighting, Bakugou felt tears sting his eyes. He stopped resisting, his voice cracking as he expressed his anguish. Kirishima turned Bakugou around, surprised to see him crying. He had only witnessed Bakugou cry once before, on the day they rescued Deku. Instead of lashing out, Bakugou clutched Kirishima's shirt, crying into his chest. Kirishima hesitantly wrapped his arms around Bakugou, holding him tighter when he didn't push away. He asked about Deku's condition, and Mina reassured them that he seemed fine. However, she was frustrated with Bakugou's earlier actions, demanding to know what had happened. Kirishima suggested that they leave Bakugou alone for now, sensing that something deeper was troubling him. He guided Bakugou out of the room, instructing the girls to stay with Deku. As they walked, Bakugou remained too distraught to process anything, simply following Kirishima. Shuji poked his head out from behind his door, asking if everything was okay. Kirishima assured him that Deku had just experienced a night terror. Once inside Kirishima's room, Bakugou continued to cry. Kirishima sat him on the bed, encouraging him to take deep breaths. He rubbed Bakugou's back, trying to comfort him and help him calm down. Kirishima whispered to himself, wondering what had transpired. He guided Bakugou through breathing exercises, encouraging him to breathe in deeply and let it out slowly. They repeated the process, working together to find a sense of calm amidst the chaos. This calmed Bakugou down enough to where he could talk. He peered anxiously towards the door, wondering if the other boy was okay. He questioned whether he had hurt him. Kirishima assured him that everything was fine. He grabbed Bakugou's hand and looked him square in the face, urging him to share what had happened in the hall. Bakugou dodged the question, abruptly standing up and expressing his intent to leave. Kirishima pulled him back down onto the bed, insisting that something had clearly shaken him up. He emphasized that he was Bakugou's friend and was there for him, encouraging him to talk. Bakugou stared at him for a moment, contemplating his next move. He sighed and laid back on the bed, revealing that the other boy had woken up, not just from sleep but with awareness and lucidity. He had talked to him. Kirishima laid back next to him, seeking clarification. Bakugou explained that the boy had been scared, even terrified, and had sounded confused and hurt. Kirishima inquired about what he had said, turning his head to look at Bakugou. Bakugou trailed off, recalling how the boy had seen him and asked what was happening. His voice cracked as he fought back tears, putting his face in his hands and resting his elbows on his knees. He expressed frustration at how the boy had fallen back into a trance. Kirishima placed a comforting hand on Bakugou's shoulder, seeking to understand his intentions. Bakugou admitted that he had been trying to snap the boy out of it, but felt like he had lost control. Kirishima questioned whether this had ever happened before, recognizing the impact it had on Bakugou. Bakugou sighed, revealing that the boy had been experiencing night terrors regularly. After waking from them, he had moments of consciousness that were becoming longer. Initially, it was just his eyes looking at Bakugou instead of staring blankly, but recently he had even said Bakugou's name. Tonight had been different. The boy had tried to stand and reach out, clearly confused about what was happening to him. Bakugou expressed how scared the boy must be, recalling the traumatic experiences he had endured before being rescued. Kirishima listened attentively, wrapping an arm around Bakugou's shoulders to provide support. He knew it was important to let Bakugou express his feelings without interruption. Bakugou lamented the pain of feeling helpless, questioning whether the best he could do was hold the boy while he suffered. He felt responsible for what had happened. Kirishima interrupted, reminding Bakugou that none of this was his fault. He emphasized that the League of Villains was to blame, not Bakugou. Bakugou countered, believing he had pushed the boy to prove himself, which led to him joining the battle. He felt he had failed to protect him and regretted not staying by his side or taking the brunt of the danger himself. Kirishima urged Bakugou to stop dwelling on the what-ifs, insisting that he had done everything he could and that it was not his fault. He reassured Bakugou that the League was entirely responsible and that the heroes were working hard to track them down. Bakugou sighed, simply expressing how much he missed the boy. After a moment of silence, Bakugou announced that he was going back to his room. He stood up and walked towards the door, pausing with his hand hovering above the knob. He warned Kirishima not to tell anyone about their conversation, not bothering to turn around.